tudi podcast Faces of Digital Health, ki gleda, kako digitalno zdravstvo uvajajo različne države po svetu. Sem pa tudi članica organizacijskega odbora letošnje konference. Preden začnemo, k besedi vabim še direktorja družbe MESI Jakoba Šušteriča, ki je bilo eno izmed ustanovnih podjetij HealthDay-ja, da pove nekaj uvodnih besed. Jakob, izvoli.
Najlepša hvala. En lep pozdrav vsem udeležencem letošnje konference, ki bo potekala po nekoliko drugačnem formatu. Videli se bomo preko spleta, namesto da bi bili skupaj in pokramljali tudi za odrjem te konference. Konferenca bo zelo zanimiva, postregla bo z ogromno izkušenimi govorci, ki bodo govorili o na vrednosti temeljenem zdravstvenem sistemu. Torej, dobrodošli še enkrat. Šel bo v angleščino, zato da pozdravim še angleške goste in potem se konferenca seveda lahko začne. So welcome everybody at this year's HealthDay conference, which is going to be in a little bit different format. We will see each other through web, but even though the conference will present very valuable speakers that are going to discuss value-based healthcare. My name is Jakob, and I come from company MESI. We help doctors and nurses discover diseases early so that they can treat patients successfully and without any terrible consequences. We believe that we also help provide value-based care, but we are for sure a very small part of the puzzle, which needs to be achieved to provide value-based healthcare. Three things that I would like to address before the conference start is behavior change, feedback loop, and small steps that we need to perform to get to the goal. What I mean with these three steps. Behavior change. If you want to change healthcare, if you want to change a big community, of course you have to change and address not only one small part, but you have to change and address many parts that contribute in the success. And here we have to talk about patients, we have to talk about healthcare providers, we have to talk about industry. And this is what HealthDay community is doing and trying to participate and bring together all the stakeholders to get all of us to the same common goal. Second thing is feedback loop. If we would like to achieve behavior change, we have to see and we have to measure how good are we doing. But if I'm going more on the concrete hospital or practice level, we have to measure how well we are treating the patient. We have to measure something in order to be aware of what we are doing. And this is also part of the value-based healthcare. And the third step, or the third challenge, small steps that are going to bring us to the common goal on the end. I really appeal that we cannot change the universe. We cannot change the whole world in a blink, in one day, right? We have to do it with small steps. We have to address each one in the challenge, help them understand their challenges, help them understand their goals. And by doing this, I believe that on the end, in few years' time, we can get to the goal, which is value-based healthcare that is bringing the patient in the center and organizing all the healthcare around him. So again, welcome at this year's HealthDay conference. Enjoy and please participate in our further discussions after the conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jakob. Now it's time for us to begin. I do want to emphasize that we want to make this event as interactive as possible. This is why we chose to have the broadcast in Zoom. Some of you are following this through the live stream on YouTube, but those of you who are with us in Zoom, Please turn on your cameras so we can see you, even though we're not together live. You can switch between two views on Zoom. So one is the gallery view, one is the speaker's view, which I recommend you turn on when the speakers are going to have their presentations. You can also write your reflections, your thoughts into chat. We're all going to take that into account when writing the summary of the event. So do share your opinions and your thoughts. And after each presentation, we're also going to give you the opportunity to talk to speakers in separate breakout rooms. So in case you want to join a breakout room after each session, just write a personal message in the chat to HealthDay.si breakout room account, and you'll be added to a breakout room. And now, let's begin. Our first speaker is from the US, John Nosta. John, are you with us?
I am here. Hello, everyone.
Okay, so John is an international speaker, one of the key opinion leaders in digital health. He is a contributing writer for Forbes, Bloomberg, Psychology Today, and other publications. And he's also a member of the advisory board of Google Health. John is also a very good friend of mine, and I'm sure he's going to wake you up with his lucid and provocative thoughts. Am I right, John?
So I have to be lucid and I have to be provocative. Okay.
You're usually like that, so
I have my coffee. I'm good.
Okay, perfect. Well, take it away then. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you all. Let me open this up a little bit. So when I do my 23andMe genetic analysis, I have, let's see, let me just open this up here. Can you all see my slides now?
No, we don't see it.
Okay, let me just click again. Make sure that we have that. Okay, let's try this one more time. Okay, is that up there now?
Yes,
Perfect.
We can see your screen. Thank you.
Excellent. You can see my messy desktop. Thank you so much for the opportunity to chat with you. When I do my 23andMe genetic analysis, I'm pleased to report that I think I'm 99% Eastern European. So there's that Eastern European blood that flows through my brain. So when I hear everyone speaking in a language that I don't understand, it still feels good in a funny way. So my Polish blood, my Romanian blood, my Hungarian blood, all that stuff is percolating today to have a chance to speak with you. It really is wonderful to be here. I run a think tank. My job is to understand what's going on in the health technology marketplace, health tech, science, life sciences. And I do it because of one thing, and this is very important that I think people need to understand. My job is about the diffusion of innovation. And what I mean by that is we have so many good ideas, but we also have a very, very complex healthcare system, whether we're in the EU, China, Australia, the United States. The magic happens in part by our ability to diffuse innovation into a complex system. So many innovators in today's world operate under the philosophy that if they build it, they will come. Build it and they will come. That's not true. Amazon fails. Apple fails. Johnson & Johnson fails when they try to bring interesting dynamic products to the marketplace. So I challenge everybody that bringing creativity to the market is a strategic endeavor. And it's very important that we consider that because the adoption is part of that sequence. And it's rather complex and it's important. And that being said, I want you to take a good look at this cartoon because I think it's really interesting and it presents to us a duality. And that duality is expressed in who's talking here. So when you look at this cartoon, we have the robot and we have the lady with the dog. And the question is it friendly? Well, in a typical current dystopian perspective, you would argue that the girl is asking the robot about the dog, is it friendly? Because we see this scary dystopian thing. But the reality is that humanity very well may be the flawed construct, that humanity may be the more dangerous construct in the world today. And technology can offer us a resilient, predictable, safe dynamic. You don't have to go as far as the driverless car to recognize that. In the US alone, 36,000 people every year are killed in car accidents. And I think that Elon Musk and his driverless car will dramatically change that. So that's our duality. Where do we live? How do we draw those lines? And it's complex. It hasn't been figured out yet, but I want you to think about that, because that dystopian reality of robots as strange and foreign, as difficult, may not very well be the case. I want to talk about this a little bit because I believe that we truly are at an inflection point in human history. And what I mean by that is that we are about to change. There's two perspectives I'll talk about here. One is the technological perspective. And if you want to take a look at this and put on some of the more scientific points, we live between the poles of two G's, of Gutenberg on one side, and that's the printing press. And remember, think about what the printing press is. It's the dissemination of information. And on the other hand, we have Google and the dissemination of information using the World Wide Web. So this technology is accelerating very, very quickly. When chief executive officers were asked, what's their greatest strategic advantage? They said speed. We can get a product done. We can bring it to market. We can react. And they said, this is great. This is important. We have to be comfortable living in fear. Then they asked him another question. They said, what keeps you up at night? And the answer was fear. The answer was speed, rather. Speed is another duality that is both a positive and a negative. So just as we could get something to market, we can also be compromised by the speed of change. And let's take a closer look at this. When you look at things like the telephone or the computer, and then mobile phone, TV, look at the smartphone, look at the adoption of the smartphone. It takes us on that curve that is upward. Remember, we talk about the exponential curve. Some people refer to it as a bit of a hockey stick. But the smartphone was almost linear. And the smartphone was something that came about 2007, so not too far away. But take a look at that in the context of health. When we look at genomic testing, for an example, we also see a similar exponential curve. When we look at telemedicine prior to COVID, we also saw an exponential curve. And similarly, it's not always up, it's sometimes down. When we look at the cost of genomic sequencing, again, we see a shift downward. And believe it or not, it's almost going to zero. As expensive as genomic testing was, we're seeing now that companies are willing to buy your data. So Google is willing to buy your data on Waze and give you free directions, but they know where you're going. So this is a little bit of a Faustian bargain, but I think we're seeing that shared experience where prices come down because the data is so valuable. Now here's one of my favorites, because we talk about how long it takes to get to 50 million users. And this is an articulation of the dynamic of speed. Airlines took a lifetime to get to 50 million users. But interestingly, Facebook took 3 years and Pokemon Go took 19 days. Think about that for a minute. 19 days to reach 50 million users. Not 50 million impressions, not 50 million potential customers or leads, but 50 million users. This is where we are in today's world. And speed is an extraordinarily powerful characteristic of that dynamic. And of course, the converse is true. Look what happened when something became digitized. When we took a camera, we did a few things. Number one, we digitized it. And here's what happened to Kodak analog photographs. We demonetized it. In other words, we made it very inexpensive. It was no longer that that 1,000 euro Nike camera, but it was a inexpensive digital camera built into something we already owned, like a phone. It was not only digitized, it was not only demonetized, it was dematerialized. In other words, it was small, we could put it in our pocket. And after it was dematerialized, everybody had one, and it was democratized. And these are the proverbial 6 Ds that Peter Diamandis talks about. But that's the fundamental dynamic that's at hand now. Now, we talk about this funny curve, this exponential curve. I want to bring up one very, very important point here. And that is the early part of the curve is deceptive. There's a point of disappointment there where the early results will actually be less than linear growth. Now, many of us in business know that linear growth, 5%, 10%, 12%, 3% growth are standard benchmarks for performance. That's important. So when we're in an exponential model, we often find that the early part of the curve is actually worse than the old school thinking. This is very important to recognize, because your boss is going to come to you and say, hey, that idea to democratize and digitalize and dematerialize it isn't working. I wish we went back to that old school model. Now, the key thing here is I didn't have anything on the X and the Y axis, because this changes from product to product, from market to market. In healthcare, this tends to be a little bit longer because of the regulatory approval, because of the intrinsic complexities of the marketplace. Now, another curve that I think is very, very important here is this idea of confidence over time. And what I found in my experience with companies like Google and Apple is that they can be a bit of a bully. In other words, they can come in and say, oxygen sensors, we can figure that out. We can put one in our watch. And you know what? We could also begin to manage the intricacies of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease or asthma. And they go in and their confidence is very high, and then they realize, you know what? Healthcare can be tough. And they fall off precipitously in terms of their competence. They realize this is difficult. And they see a dynamic that's a bit like this. They go from, I know everything, to there's more than I thought. I'm never going to understand it. And they come up to a new equilibrium. So it's not always a smooth curve. And the interesting thing is this flies in the very face of the notion of fail fast. I'm sure every one of you has talked about fail fast. In other words, if it doesn't work, pivot, be agile, move on. But the reality is, in different industries, there is a bit of a learning curve. And in healthcare, in the life science industry, you have to be very mindful about failing fast, because if you follow this standard, you'll fail early and you'll miss a tremendous market opportunity. So I think it's not about failing fast. It's actually about failing smart. So I want to talk a little bit about why today is important, and look a little bit about today, about this time in the universe as being an interesting inflection point. And as it turns out, it's an interesting inflection point for two important reasons. I'm going to go back 100 years, talk about what happened in the year 1900. And I'm not an expert in European history, but I'll say that not a lot happened in the early part of that century. But what we saw, the magic started to emerge around 1915, 1920, 100 years ago from today. And what we saw was social strife, right? Social strife, the horror of World War I, the Russian Revolution. But interestingly, we also saw this thing called the Spanish flu. Think about that. Think about how relevant the Spanish flu is now, but go back a year and it wasn't even on our radar. But something happened 100 years ago, and we can have some very, very interesting lessons. 100 years ago, we also saw the transformative power of science. Einstein's special theory of relativity, the mass of an electron. Think about that. Not big data, small data. 1.6 times 10 to the minus coulomb, minus 19th coulombs, or 9.1 to the minus 31st kilograms. We began to recognize that there are fundamental innovations that translated to something that is directly related to this. And this is really part of the magic. The magic is that sense of wonder. Around 1917, 1918, 1920, we saw wonder come into our lives. And that's really an important dynamic. It's not science for science. It's not science in Copernicus's view. It's not science in abstract mathematical models. It's indoor plumbing. It's a gas stove. It's the emergence of vaccinations. 100 years ago. Televisions, it's the airplane, the emergence of the airplane that provoked a duality that is consistent with any type of technology today. Wonder and fear. That farmer in his field who saw that airplane in the sky said, wow, this is the coolest thing in the world. But when he was offered a ride, he said, no way. Me, my family, my wife, no way. I'm not getting in there. So we saw this emergence of things going on 100 years ago. And we also saw a social consciousness. And that social consciousness in the United States exactly 100 years ago was related to women's right to vote. It was the collective authority of society that began to shape intellectual and social policy. That was a very important construct that came to life exactly 100 years ago. Now I want to jump ahead and talk about 2000, but particularly about our time today. If you think about what happened in the year 2000, kind of nothing happened. Similar to 1900. You could argue that Y2K happened, but in fact, Y2K didn't happen. But we're seeing something today that is really interesting. That same kind of global concerns, including social, including political, including economic, including clinical. And when I talk about clinical, I'm talking here about obesity, Alzheimer's disease, cognitive decline, metabolic syndrome. Then all of a sudden, just a few months ago, just like 100 years ago, what happened? COVID-19 emerged. So we're seeing this high level of strife that's pushing us into a new century. That's why I think the century really began a few months ago. Really begins today in an abstract way. And what we're seeing on top of that is a similar emergence of innovation, the transformation, the power of science, robotics, genetic testing, smartphone, AI, advanced analytics that's providing us with this grand sense of wonder, from 3D printing to a self-driving car to personalized drug therapy. Wonder is something that is emergent, taking a foothold in our world today, and it's very, very important. Finally, there's a sense of awareness, and that awareness is defined by a term that we all use in the digital health space. That's the quantified self. Personalized therapy, the quantified self. And that's a real important observation, that our social consciousness and collective, including the patient, is an important dynamic. Now, thousands of years ago, millions of years ago, it's proposed that an asteroid hit the Earth and killed the dinosaurs, destroyed a life form that pushed evolution farther along. And I think that we had the same thing happen just a few months ago, that there is not quite an extinction event, but an event that pushes us forward in the context of technology. What that does is that takes us to a new vista, and it moves us forward in the context of changing the basic reality and pushing us to a new area. Now, I'm just going to go through this very, very quickly and talk about what are these sort of big issues, the big questions that we have to think about. First and foremost on my list is the role of artificial intelligence in the context of humanity. For me, AI is no longer a service. AI is no longer a carve-out. Technology is integral not only to the human experience, but AI is becoming the smartest person in the room. Now, think about that for a second. The smartest person in the room, that's the job for the doctor. The doctor is the smartest person in the room. I mean that kiddingly, but there's a lot of truth to that. And once AI becomes a partner in care, AI will shift the cognitive heavy lifting away from the clinician so that better choices can be made and the human experience can actually be expanded. So I think that AI is here. It's demanding a seat at the table. So when we think of this notion of collaboration, that's the catchphrase. We live in a collaboratory where we bring in multiple stakeholders, doctors, patients, caregivers, payers, all sorts of organizations. That seat at the table must include technology and how technology plays a role. This is very, very important. I also think that our use of data is going to be real interesting. We talk about recycling. We recycle plastic, metal, various elements. Can we recycle data? I think it's a very, very important area, because when we look at all the data that's accumulated, let's say in a clinical trial, it often looks at 2 to 3 clinical endpoints that are defined by the principal investigator. I think there's extraordinary amounts of data in there that we can mine, that we can look at. If we're interested in diabetes, why can't we go into a clinical trial and have AI and a human construct look at that and find all these valuable points of connection, because I think that there are important associations that are actually hiding in plain sight. Now, I think that life extension is a very valid clinical endpoint. I think that it's appropriate, but I want you to look at this not just as a single endpoint, but as an X and Y axis. In other words, what we really have to look at is life extension and life expansion. And everyone gets really scared about life extension because they think we're all going to be 110 years old sitting in wheelchairs. That's wrong. That's not the way to look at it. I want you to look at life extension and life expansion in the context of growing GDP of a country, of having someone not have one career, but have 3 careers. For 20 years, you're a doctor. Then for 20 years, you're a teacher. And then for 20 years, you're, who knows, something else. So I think we have to change the way we think about this as life extension, because it's often perceived as kind of weird, like living forever. So that's a real important idea. And I think that we need to look at it again as an X and Y axis, life extension, life expansion. And how does that not compromise or burden a healthcare system, but expand not only the human reality, but the functional reality that lives in a political and even an economic space? So this is supposed to be scary, this doctor. I think the answer is yes. Are physicians obsolete? They are, but it's the physician of today. It's that physician who is tied to the past. Again, my belief is that physicians will evolve, that physicians will recognize that, maybe I don't need to understand or memorize what the second intermediate pathway of the Krebs cycle is. Do I really need to remember 1,6-fructose diphosphate? Or can I share that cognitive burden to allow me to become a better physician, a smarter physician, a more human physician, a physician with expanded sensory opportunities or capabilities? So I think this is where the new physician of tomorrow will evolve. Now, here's the question. At least in the United States, I often hear that physicians say they spend too much time with technology and they don't spend enough time with their patients. What will happen in 5 or 10 years when we give physicians 15 or 20 minutes to spend with a patient, to chat with a patient, to hold their hand? My belief is that they might start complaining about that too. So it's going to be a tricky dynamic, a duality, because there are 2 tragedies in life. One is not getting what you want. The other is getting it. So increased time with patients is not the only goal. It's efficient time with patients and building human connections mediated by technology that drive superior outcomes. That's the value concept. That's what really kind of moves this forward. And finally, I just want to talk a little about this notion of consumer centricity. I believe that the life science industry is not consumer centric, or let's say patient centric. I think that's wrong. If you want to play the consumer centricity game and you want to fight your battle against Apple or Amazon, you've already lost. For me, the life science tech, particularly the digital health space, is science centric and consumer infused. So while the patient is at the center of many of the discussions, most companies that I work with, including big companies like Google and Apple and Johnson & Johnson, employ almost no social scientists. They employ bench chemists and people who find innovations on the science side. So I think that the life science companies are making a big mistake by rallying around patient centricity and having the same tagline. Everyone talks about the same thing and they end up being undifferentiated. This is the era, this is the time of the life science company, particularly in the context of COVID and vaccines and therapies. This is the time for the life science companies to step up, embrace science, and recognize that they are the heroes and they are the industry that we should embrace and the kids want to be when they grow up. So I want to leave you with this final thought that in today's world, it's important to be smart. That's your IQ. It's important to be empathic. We want to recognize the humanity in each other. But I argue that our ability to assimilate technology, our TQ, is part of that equation. Because whether you're a student, a doctor, a brand manager, your ability to assimilate technology into your job, into your life, is a direct and independent arbiter of your success. With that, I will thank you, and I'll turn off my screen here, see if we can hop back into the picture. Okay.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. I know I was talking fast, so I apologize.
I think you still gave us a lot to think about, which is what is going to be discussed in the next 10 minutes. Just before we continue, since a lot of you has joined us in the last few minutes, I would just like to ask you all to make sure that you're on mute while others are speaking, so we can see we can hear the speakers very clearly. We would, however, kindly ask you to turn on your cameras so we can see each other. This is a Zoom meeting. You can also send one-on-one a message to other participants of the conference, and in a few minutes we will give you an opportunity to talk to John in a special breakout room, which you can get to by writing a personal message to the account HealthDay.si breakout rooms. As I said, John, you gave us a lot to think about, but instead of me asking you questions, we decided that we're going to give you an external speaker to challenge your thoughts and to balance what you just said. Okay?
Perfect.
Great. So when we were thinking about who would be that right person to,
wait, I should say, I'm going to say, Istenem.
Isten?
Istenem. For
What's
my
that?
Hungarian. It means, oh my God, it's for my Hungarian. I got a couple laughs on that. That's as good as I have for my Eastern European language.
Okay, so the person you're going to talk to, or the person that's going to ask you questions, is the CEO of Better, Tomasz Gornik. So Tomasz has a very broad knowledge about the digital health and healthcare IT industry. He very diligently is looking at all the trends that are happening. He's also a renowned advocate of open data and believes that in healthcare, data should come first and applications second. And I'm sure he's going to have a lot of questions for you. So, Tomasz, the word is yours. Are you with us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. So tell us, what went through your mind when you were listening to John's speech?
Well, it was a lot to handle. Of course, it was packed with ideas and theories on healthcare, and I've actually narrowed it down to three topics, which I'd like to get your more feedback on. The first one is dear to my heart, and that's health data, and I'm pretty sure we agree that health data is what drives a lot of these innovations that you talk about. But I also see, of course, the lack of good health data as a deterrent to a lot of the initiatives that you mentioned, especially AI. So I'd like to ask you, we see what's happening in the US with so-called data blocking. We know how siloed the data is. And why do you think this will change in order to enable the AI that you talk about? Because we see that this is going really, really slowly. The availability, putting the data together, the privacy issues, these are all quite ingrained in healthcare systems of today. And of course, they are a necessity for making AI work.
That's, there are a few factors, Tomasz, about that. Number one, I think that we live in a world where we vacillate between two poles again, and that's option and imperative. So a lot of the things we do with technology today are optional. The data we use on our smartphone is seen in apps. The apps are optional. And what I think is important is that the clinical validation of big data sets and AI in clinical practice need to emerge. In other words, we need to have more substantial proof sources. So when I can show you in a large data set that I could reduce your mortality from congestive heart failure and let you live 10 more years, what happens? The notion of privacy becomes seen in a very, very different light. The power of data becomes realized. So for me, I see a lot of these data sets. Oh, I don't know, let's pick something. Some of the apps now where we've been saying that the data it's a Chinese-based company and I'm not going to be able to use it because it's a national security risk. Those are optional things. So I think that when you look at the area of where something becomes imperative. Now, that being said, I've often said that I think that data is, we have to understand what data is. You know, people say data is the new oil, right? Whatever that kind of thing is. I think that data is the third window into humanity. And let me explain that for a minute. I don't want to get too long-winded on this, but Copernicus and the telescope showed us something. It showed us that we could look at a world that's far away and recognize that the world is rather different than we think. In fact, the Earth travels around the sun and not the other way around. He was declared a blasphemy for this. That same language exists today in data science. So the telescope. The second one was the microscope. And we all know in the life science industry how powerful the microscope is in letting us see a reality, whether it's what's light or the electron microgram. And I think that's where we are with data. Data is the third fundamental window into humanity that is and will change the game. So I think a lot of the data issues around privacy and concerns are in areas where it doesn't matter, where the controversy is bigger than the outcome. I'm going to say that again, because I think that's a real interesting dynamic. The ability, the controversy, the problem of a data set is bigger than the functional advantages we get from the data. But I think once we find that shift from an option to an imperative, and that will come probably in healthcare. You know, once we start saving lives, I think it's going to be a big deal.
Yeah. No, I agree with you on the consumer side, but I'm more talking about the blocking by corporations and vendors and people who have a business model built around that data. But let's maybe go to the next topic. Sure. Because we only have 10 minutes. So the second question is around the physicians, the care teams, and your notion of the smartest person in the room. So, you know, I fully agree that where you have situations where you actually don't have to see the patient, like imaging, radiology, things like that, that's a no-brainer. The computer is going to do much better there. But, talking to a lot of people in healthcare, the other side where you're actually physically interacting with the patient and have other, all the sensory information you can get as a human, I would argue that, the computer is still a long way from sensing things in that context, unless you as the person can actually transfer that information somehow into digital form, which of course is cumbersome and not that easy to do. So, an assistant, yes, but, we hear a lot about this idea of the computer setting diagnosis. It's always operating on a limited set of data because it just doesn't have the direct interaction with the patient that a physician has. So what do you think about that?
I have to say that I've done a lot of thinking about this. And of course, my comments are meant to provoke. So yeah. I think that we are on that journey, that if you look at not only the point in time, but the trajectory. And I want to address this from two perspectives. One is you talked about the human sensory experience, that I could look at a patient and I could see their bulging neck veins, or I can see their orthopnea, or I can see that their lips are blue, whatever that clinical construct is. Number one, the human construct, the human form is not the optimum or not the optimal sensory reality. My dog smells 50 times greater than I do. Right? Our ability to see the electromagnetic spectrum is only a very, very small part of that spectrum. Our vision is, the quote unquote 20/20 vision, normal human vision, is not optimal. In fact, Tiger Woods, the famous golfer, had his vision corrected to 2015, so he had supervision. When we do surgery, when I'm doing microsurgery and I'm reanastomosing a blood vessel, or let's say I'm suturing something on a patient's eyebrow, and I'm using 60639 Proline with a P3 cutting needle. I know that means nothing to most people, but if I'm using this tiny little needle, I can use robotic augmentation to have better motor control. So I think that the sensory experience of the human, particularly the physician, is good. It's not great. It's not definitive. And I think that's number one where technology comes in. For example, when I go to the doctor and I have a history and physical, my voice is a template upon which physiologic information travels. We're looking at the opportunity to diagnose things like Parkinson's disease. depression. Listen to this one. Coronary artery disease from voice. I don't even know how the heck they do it, but I see the data and it's happening there. So to me, I think that number one, the human construct is frail. That, you know, look at COVID. What COVID did was shined a light on clinical inadequacies. What COVID did was shined a light on our educational system that might not be that good. And now I teach my kids at home and they actually have a better curriculum. So it's tricky, but I think that the trajectory is such that, look, let's do one quick example. You know, I get carried away here. I get excited when we talk about this.
John, I have to cut you a little bit here. Sorry.
Okay.
Can I just have one more question?
Since we need to continue with the program, we will move you and Tomasz in a separate breakout room. So those that wish to continue the discussion, write to HealthDay.si breakout rooms. Just a private message, and you're going to be sent there. But we are going to continue with the topic of precision medicine and personalized medicine, which falls well under the concept of value-based care, which is a concept that emphasizes that healthcare should go in the direction where payments and services are developed around the value they bring to the patient. So we're going to listen a little bit more about personalized medicine in oncology by our next speaker, Dennis Horgan, who is the Executive Director of the European Alliance for Personalized Medicine. So, Mr. Horgan, the word is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And it's difficult to follow such a great speaker that spoke last time. So very happy to be here today. I think I have slides as well. Should I show these or will one of your colleagues?
Please share them.
If I can share them. Share screen. So yeah, I mean, a key issue, I mean, which I'm trying to figure out how to share these slides. I've sent it to HealthDay as well, so you should have them there.
Just so we don't lose any time, we'll try to find those slides, but is it possible that you start with your talk without them?
Yeah, of course.
Okay,
a key question, I mean, which was highlighted in the previous discussion was that we have a lot of data. And this is very true. There is a lot of data there. And he also highlighted why has the systems not adapted? And he talked a lot about privacy. I think this issue of privacy is an issue that has been highlighted. But I think in the personalized medicine space, and also if you look at the multiple stakeholders in the area, where you have the patient organizations, you have industry from the different areas, from pharmaceutical, diagnostic, and IT. You have the different medical professionals, specifically in the area of oncology. When you have the different specialties from radiotherapy, oncology, pathology, etc., as well as your different payer organizations. The key question is, what kind of data will derive the evidence to allow a decision to be made? And what kind of decision can be made to allow funding to be allocated? And this is the key driver of how science is evolving to drive forward innovation. The question is data, but a lot of these issues links into the regulatory frameworks and institutional frameworks to do this. So it's not per se that the citizens themselves are worried about their sharing of data. Any patient that has got a disease, is willing to share the data. But often there's an issue with I can't figure out how to share my slides. But often there's an issue is what is the institutional framework to support this? And this has been a question because science has evolved so quickly. And the question is, how can this science be brought into healthcare systems? And while a lot of other areas has evolved, which we heard about the telescope, the microscope in the last presentation, but also we have the genomes, which cost over 1 billion euros to sequence 20 years ago. Now the cost has dramatically reduced. So the key question is, what does data allow us to understand? It allows us to understand what incidence and outcome of a disease progression. How is a certain patient or citizen susceptible to a certain disease? Or how to have data to understand what is the reaction to a certain treatment, or how to have data to understand which patient will get which disease, and what is the extent of the use of certain treatments. What is the impact of this? But this needs a regulatory or policy framework, whether at a global level or at a region level, taking account region Europe, or looking at a country level, looking at Slovenia. But one needs a coordinating framework how to support this. And personalized medicine is really a perfect storm. And COVID-19 is an example of this storm that has been created. You have huge amounts of data, you have a huge change in science, and there's more funding coming into the area. And the question is, how can the different healthcare actors, even new type of healthcare actors, support this? So at the European level, they have looked at how can we develop a policy framework around this. And this started in 2015 under the Luxembourg Presidency Council. Of course, in the cancer area, it started earlier. You had a council, European Council recommendations on cancer screening in 2003. And happily to say that Slovenia has really taken a lead since 2008, organizing the first presidency conference on cancer that led to the council, led to this European Partnership for Action Against Cancer. And then Slovenia has taken a lead in terms of the different joint actions, which are European instruments to coordinate the framework to tackle cancer at the European level. But coming back to the European Council conclusions on personalized medicine, these came out in 2015. Of course, there's different ways to understand what is personalized medicine, because often there's no commonly defined term. But from a policy area, we came up with a model, a framework that tries to not define it, but sets out what is the framework to do this. And how we define it is, it's a medical module using characteristics of individual phenotypes and genotypes, so including the molecular profiling, medical imaging, lifestyle data, for tailoring the right therapeutic strategy for the right person at the right time, and or to determine the predisposition to diseases to deliver timely and targeted prevention. So it catches these issues from early diagnosis, so catching a patient which may have an early cancer or going into stage 1 cancer, and how to treat these patients earlier so you can have a better quality of life. Or if they're late stage disease, rather than treating them, whether it's a benefit to treat them. So the question is, how can resources be better allocated? Because often the most expenditure of a person's life is spent at the last 6 months. The question for healthcare systems, taking account all the science that we have, is how can this science be mobilized to bring a better quality of life for the citizens and patients? And taking account of the issues that the last speaker mentioned, this is a collective effort then, because everybody wants to have a better quality of life. The question is, how can the institutional and organizational, legal, regulatory policy framework support this to guarantee that the systems are in place to drive forward that? So it's very much a system-based approach where you need a common framework to bring these stakeholders together and to drive it forward. So not solely putting the patient in the center, but is acting, saying, how can the patients themselves be a key driver to drive forward the healthcare systems? And that's what we're very much looking towards. Whereas this had the benefit for the broader stakeholders in terms of with more personalizing healthcare, so a better understanding of science, better utilization of data, bringing together the scientific and research and the regulators and payers. How can we bring down, how can we utilize existing funding? Let's say, because often personalized medicine, we focus on, these are very expensive treatments, but that is, I mean, of course, everything new, like a new Apple phone, of course, it's quite expensive, but of course the cost drops substantially. As I mentioned at the very outset, sequencing a genome. But with having a better understanding of science, this can, and taking out the inefficiencies, this can reduce the cost of development. And this is the key issue, because if you have more systems that can bring down the cost of developing new diagnostics or developing new therapeutics, this will bring down the cost of developing different types of innovations. And this is often the biggest hurdle, because different regulatory frameworks have often created more hurdles while trying to tackle ad hoc issues in the past. So if you have more policy frameworks that can support and give guarantees to the stakeholders, whether industry or scientific community, around where they should allocate time and resources, this would facilitate enabling innovation. But also, identifying patients, whether breast cancer patients with different type of diseases, to avoid side effects. So you're optimizing the indications for different types of diseases, and then you're allowing safe, accelerated access to medicines, as we're seeing in terms of COVID-19, how the biomedical research community have come together in terms of generating different diagnostic techniques to identify which patients may have COVID, and how can we trace and track. So you need better collection of data. You need the same guidelines across different countries to understand how they're identifying patients, but how is this shared between countries? So all this leads to new outcome measurements and leads to effective data collection. But then you need the involvement of the different regulatory authorities, from the European Medicines Agency, from the regulatory authority, and also health technology assessment decision makers to understand whether certain treatments have the clinical effectiveness or clinical efficacy, but also whether they should be reimbursed. But often in the personalized healthcare area is very much, if you look at the diagnostics issue, often these type of technologies have not been reimbursed. And what is the value of this diagnostic information to drive forward this type of innovation? So these are key issues linked to regulatory policy and stakeholder alignment. And this was the outline of the Council conclusions on personalized medicine that I've mentioned. And they're very much in 4 broad buckets. One is on education, so broad public education, so engaging with the population to explain to them, about getting testing, about the benefits of what is not per se personalized medicine, but understanding their own genetic and scientific genes, so whether they have a predisposition to a certain disease, and how can best practice be shared between different countries to support efficiencies in the healthcare systems. And that also leads to more public-private cooperation. How can the private sector supply the services to the public sector to support this? But a key issue then is the regulatory framework. And one area there was that we tried to focus on, as my background was a lawyer, so we did a lot of work on the GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, which was probably mentioned during the conference. But often this regulation, because we did a lot of work on this, at an institution level, at the commission level, there was over 4,000 parliamentary or political opinions. So you had different stakeholders that came together, and they had multiple opinions regarding the GDPR regulation. And the question there was, of course, every stakeholder had their opinion how to do it, but the question was not the legislation, because legislation wants to provide to regulate how actors interact with each other. So it wants to provide certainty, but it's often very difficult to regulate the future. And this has been a difficulty at the European level, because healthcare is a national competence. So then you want to try to have a governance framework. How can you cooperate together, which I'll come on to. And this needs, and also you need better data standards and collecting and sharing and processing of data. But we have a lot of these data standards existing at a global level, at a European level, at a regional level, but often is the implementation across different countries to ensure that it is done effectively. So this needs a broader cooperating mechanism to allow this governance framework to be put in place. Of course, the next pillar was on research and use of big data, what is big data? It's a lot of small data collected together. And then we focused a lot, it was on the ERNs, European Reference Networks, and they're the area of research and development, which is linked into this other initiative called IC PERMED, which was trying to avoid the duplication of research. And the last but not least, of course, was the access to personalized medicine therapies, and how can we drive forward the use of genomics for public health. So these are key pillars in 2016. My talk was focused on oncology, so I should mention the upcoming European Beating Cancer Plan. And this has 4 broad pillars again. One on prevention, one on diagnosis, one on treatment, and last but not least, on quality of life of patients and survivors. And of course, the last pillar is very much connected to the first pillar, because fundamentally, what a clinician wants to do, what a scientist wants to do, what a researcher wants to do, what a patient wants to do, what industry do, they want to bring value to this healthcare system. But they have different mechanisms how they want to do this. So the question is how to see how the different stakeholders can contribute to shaping this. And as I mentioned, a lot of focus has been on the area of prevention. But a key issue in the oncology space, I would say, is the use of biomarkers and advanced molecular diagnostics to drive forward the identification of patients. And this driver is a key issue in terms of how do we utilize data. And I mentioned, which is a talk I have to do next on another, with a commission discussion, is around this declaration for the 1 Million Genome Project, which was started in 2000, which was signed in Digital Day 2 in 2018. And this is an idea that I came up with, and it was called MEGA, the Million European Genome Alliance. So it's called the 1 Million Genome Project. So the idea was not to sequence 1 million genomes. The idea, the 1 million genomes, because it fit into a nice acronym called MEGA, Million European Genome Alliance. So from MEGA. So we wanted a mega idea for Europe. It could have been Tega, trillion, it could have been Hega, 100, but MEGA seemed to be catchy for the politicians. And this idea was not sequencing 1 million, because of course we can sequence. The day is long, so we can sequence a lot if we have the funding to sequence. The question is how to mobilize the data between the different healthcare systems, not only on genome data, but also clinical data, on what is to facilitate interoperability between these different types of healthcare systems. Because the General Data Protection Regulation try to focus on the issue of protecting data by inclusion of the word protecting. But it's often not protecting, it's often how do we empower data? And what is the role of the stakeholders, as I just outlined, to drive this forward? Now we have 23 member states that have signed up to this, and there's 5 observers. Germany and Belgium signed up. Germany signed up in February under Jens Spahn. This was in February. And then Belgium signed up in the last weeks. So we have 23 member states that have committed to this. And the question is, what is the framework to ensure interoperability between healthcare systems around this? And this links into this broader legislative framework that will come into in 2021 that we will be working on as well. If I focus specifically on cancer, well, the work we've done recently is we've done a lot of work on biomarker testing and molecular diagnostics, but as well on the issue of lung cancer. And lung cancer has been a disease area where there's a lot of discussion. A lot of people have discussed it for a long time. A lot of people are out of breath for discussing it. But the question is, there hasn't been very much action to support, from a political level, lung cancer policy frameworks. While we have screening guidelines on breast, cervical, and colorectal, there hasn't been a specific focus on lung cancer as one of the main cancers, but also prostate cancer. So people forgot about the men in the room. But we're going to these 2 disease areas are included in this EU Beating Cancer Plan. But it's fine to have a plan, but the question is, of course, a detail. How can we implement this in practice? So in terms of molecular diagnostics and biomarker testing, we focused on what are the resources that need to be put in place at a member state level, at a European region level, and also looking at a country level. So we divided this into different areas, focused on drivers. What are the drivers in the area? What are the problems in the area? What are the objectives? What are the inputs? What are the results? And what is the impact of this? And I have a very nice slide, which nobody can see. to show you, but unfortunately, you can't see it. It has nice colors as well. But it's some of the drivers, and so we divided this into a key area of minimum testing and optimal testing. But of course, it's on a minimum. Some patients should have a minimum, and some patients should have an optimal. Of course, we want the best standard of care for everybody. But the issue there was how to, what did they, from a policy level, because policymakers have to decide, because they have to understand themselves how they could implement this. Because at a policy level, we talk about policy, but a policy is divided in different, specialties. We have one on research, or in translation research.
Morgan, sorry to interrupt you. We just have to be a little bit mindful on time. So please, if you could try to go towards the final thoughts of your presentation.
Okay, even better. So then we have key issues about drivers, what we can focus on. So there's a lot of science out there from minimum testing. So a lot of science, how could science be better brought into healthcare systems? And a problem, of course, is not all patients have access to biomarker testing. Of course, an objective is how all patients want to have quality biomarker testing in terms to inform their treatment. The same with all stakeholders. So the question is, how can industry, science from different specialties, patients, regulators understand the benefit of this? So a key issue there is, how do we have clear reimbursement lines to do this, to support to incentivize innovation, but to reward innovation? And how can this be done in a more clear way? So you've also the in vitro diagnostic regulation that provides more certainty around this. And then the results will be better access to biomarker testing, and then in more informed decisions. Linked to optimal testing, which is a key issue, is often it's insufficient economic interest to develop biomarkers, often because they don't get reimbursed from an optimal level. And often these issues arise around the ecosystem to support molecular diagnostics. So how to support this at the European area? So we need to tackle some of these market failure issues, because patients with effective treatment options in the EU is often due to lack of biomarker testing. So we want to ensure a high level of early and accurate diagnosis that will allow a better uptake of this. And this needs a criteria for reimbursement, but also incentive for data collection and how this data could be curated, whether at a pan-European level or pan-cancer level, in terms of a registry or a federated data registry, and how will this link to increase survival. So it is different EU instruments which we primarily work on. I'll stop in one more minute. And we have different European instruments that can support this. So there's a lot of effort now on cancer. The question is how to do it in a more effective way. One of the key areas that we're focusing on is the area of oncology, which my focus of my presentation was. And then it was in the issue of this area of biomarkers and molecular diagnostics within the area of data. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. You talked a lot about what kind of hurdles there are from, getting innovations into practice. And I'm very, very happy that today we have with us also an oncologist, Dr. Simona Borštnar, who is an internal medicine and oncology specialist from the Institute of Oncology in Ljubljana. She's also the head of the multidisciplinary team for breast cancer and the president of Sinology Institute in Slovenia. And Dr. Borštnar, hello, can you hear us?
So, hello, can I share my screen, please?
Sorry?
Can I share my screen, please, now?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. Before you begin, I just wanted to say that in July this year, the Slovenian Health Insurance Institute started covering some of the genetic tests to aid oncologists in decision-making for treatments they choose for their specific patients. So we're very curious to hear what this means, what's changing now. So please, I look very much forward to the next presentation.
So, good afternoon. I'm very glad to be with all of you on this virtual meeting, and I must thank to organizers to invite me. I'm a clinician in the first line, and I will give you the clinician view to genetic testing, which is important for cancer treatment decision. We all know that our bodies are made up of trillions of cells grouped to form tissues and organs. And inside the nucleus of each cell, there are chromosomes made of thousands of genes, which tell the cell when to grow, work, divide, and die. And normally, our cells follow these instructions and we stay healthy. And cancer is actually genetic disease because it's caused by changes to genes, and these changes we call mutation. It means that the gene has been damaged or lost or copied twice. So everyone of us has some risk of developing cancer, and actually estimation for Slovenia is that every second man and every third woman will get cancer during their life. And in most cases, the disease develops by chance. This is sporadic cancer. So at birth, we get two genes, one from mother and one from father, and usually these genes are healthy, non-mutated. However, during the life, we are exposed to influences from environment, and new mutations may happen during the time. After two or more mutations, when both allele of gene are affected, then normal cell transforms to cancer cell and cancer grows. However, some people are genetically predisposed to developing certain types of cancer, and we're talking about hereditary cancers. In such cases, child become mutated gene from one of parents, and during the life, another mutation could occur, and in hereditary cancers, cancer develop more frequently and earlier in the life. So, majority of cancers are sporadic. That means that only one organ in the body is affected by tumor cells. However, in hereditary cancers, all cells in the body are affected with this germ line mutation. And the consequence of this is that when we have sporadic cancer, we must done tumor biopsy, and in this tumor tissue from the tumor, we can determine possible genetic mutation. In patients with germline mutations, when all cells in the body are affected with these mutations, we could diagnose such mutation with blood sample, because the mutation is present also in the blood cells. Oncogenomics is a relatively new field of genomics that applies high technologies to characterize genes associated with cancer. And oncogenomics could predict the risk of developing cancer, predict clinical outcome of cancer, and find or determine target for targeted therapies. This is the field of personalized or precision oncology nowadays. First goal of genetic testing in oncology is to predict risk of cancer. And a good example for that is hereditary breast and ovarian cancer, which is in most cases caused by mutation of BRCA1 or BRCA2 gene. These BRCA genes are tumor suppression genes which are involved in the repair of DNA and accounts about 5% of breast cancer cases and about 12% of ovarian cancer cases. So the lifetime risk in women which are BRCA1 carriers is up to 87% for breast cancer, up to 44% for ovarian cancer, and also doubled risk for prostate cancer. In the cases of BRCA2 mutation, the lifetime risk for breast cancer is up to 80%, for ovarian cancer 27%, for male breast cancer, which is actually very rare disease, up to 7%, and in prostate cancer up to 30%. And also BRCA2 mutation carriers have increased risk for pancreatic and cancer and malignant melanoma. Why is so important to know if such mutation, a germline mutation, is present? Because we could intervene. You can see on the picture, on the gray, light gray curve, the survival probability in healthy women who are not carriers of BRCA mutation. And on a blue curve below, you can see survival probability in BRCA1 carriers. And all other curves showed us improvement of survival when we have one intervention. Even only close surveillance, close follow-up, this is the yellow curve, or maybe prophylactic mastectomy or ovariectomy, this shows us the violet curve above. So we can improve survival when we know if some woman or man is carrier of BRCA mutation. In addition to that, it is very important to know also this information at the time of surgery of breast cancer patients, because this information determines kind of surgery. And nowadays is BRCA1 or 2 mutation also predictive marker for response to targeted therapy with PARP inhibitors in ovarian cancer as well as in metastatic breast cancer. So second very important goal of genetic testing in oncology is to predict prognosis and response to therapy. And again, a good example for that is breast cancer. So you know that breast cancer is most frequent female cancer in Slovenia and of course also worldwide, and yearly incidence of this disease in about 1,400 in our country. And majority of breast cancer patients start the treatment with surgery and then continue treatment with one kind of adjuvant systemic therapy. But before decision about proper adjuvant systemic therapy, our pathologist prepare tumor tissue, tumor blocks, tumor slides, and describe us characteristics of the tumor. And these basic characteristics of the tumor are determined by immunohistochemical, different immunohistochemical methods in pathology laboratory. And since these characteristics are nodal status, size of tumor, differentiation of tumor, proliferation marker, presence of lymphovascular invasion, and most important, expression of estrogen and progesterone receptors and HER2 status. On the basis of these characteristics, we could decide of which treatment is the best for each individual patients. So we classified tumors in 5 main subtypes, and then we decide to give the patients hormonal therapy only in hormone receptor positive, HER2 negative disease with low proliferation, or both chemotherapy and hormonal therapy, or maybe anti-HER2 therapy when patients have overexpression of HER2 receptor, or chemotherapy only in triple negative breast cancer. But in routine clinical practice, the things are not always very simple, and there is the group of patients when we don't know, when we not know if chemotherapy actually is necessary or not. we could not decide if particular patients need hormonal therapy only or both chemotherapy and hormonal therapy. In these cases, this is about 80 patients per year among these 1,400 new diagnosed breast cancer patients in Slovenia, need further diagnostic with genetic test. This is gene signature test. Gene signature are actually genomic tests which analyze a sample of the tumor to see how active certain genes are. And activity level of these genes showed us proliferation potential of each individual tumor. So most validated and most used gene signature tests are Oncotype and MammaPrint. Oncotype capture 16 proliferation genes and 5 control genes, and MammaPrint captured 70 genes connected with tumor cell proliferation. And with such gene signature on the picture is MammaPrint. With such gene signature, we obtain information about prognosis. We know now is that patients of low genetic risk for progression or high genetic risk for progression. And such tests could tell us likelihood of treatment benefit. And when we get results, this is the results of Oncotype, which is described by a recurrence score result, or MammaPrint result, which is described very simply with low genomic signature or high genomic signature. And when we get this test, then we could decide for this red group of patients if they need hormonal therapy only or both chemotherapy and hormonal therapy. And with this test, we could omit chemotherapy in 70% of these patients. This is very important because chemotherapy could be unpleasant with many side effects, and all patients are very happy when we said them that chemotherapy is not necessary. Our third goal of genetic testing in oncology is to find and to determine targets for targeted therapies and how to detect this target, either with detection of mutated damaged gene or detection of abnormal protein, which is product of this mutated gene. And this is actually the example of nowadays precision medicine, and this concept based on the fact that we must find the proper treatment for each individual patient. So we have, for example, a group of breast cancer patients, and we look for the target, for example, HER2 status. If this status is positive, this is if receptor is overexpressed, or receptor is negative, is not overexpressed. So we perform diagnostic tests, either with immunohistochemistry in pathology laboratory or in situ hybridization in fish, fluorescent in situ hybridization is some cases. And when we get result, if diagnostic test is positive, we know that such patient likely will likely benefit from targeted therapy against this target. This means anti-HER2 therapy targeted against HER2 overexpressed HER2 receptor. And in patients where diagnostic test is negative, we could expect that targeted treatment will be ineffective, and we must choose another treatment. So we have enormous number of targeted therapies nowadays in different kinds of cancer. I will not explain that in details because this is impossible. However, for majority of these targeted therapies, we need the determination of target, not for all, but for majority of them. And all these targets could be determined either with immunohistochemical and other methods in our pathology laboratory, or with another molecular test in the department at the Department of Molecular Diagnostic at the Institute of Oncology in Ljubljana. So, and I must say that we are capable to measure and to determine all targets which are needed for registered anti-cancer that are currently in Slovenia and in Europe. And instead of conclusion, I will only ask myself, are genetic tests available to Slovenian patients? And I'm glad to say yes, for predicting risk of developing cancer, yes, for predicting clinical outcome of cancer, and yes, to find or determine targets for targeted therapy. And I'm really thankful to our Slovenian Health Insurance Institute that reimbursed not only all registered anti-cancer treatment, but also all necessary diagnostic tests. I'm thankful in the name of my colleagues and especially in the name of our cancer patients. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Boršnar. We have a few people that would like to join you in the breakout room. So anyone in the audience that wants to ask Dr. Boršnar any additional questions, please indicate so in the chat. We are a little bit off schedule, but I still suggest that since this was quite an intense content so far, let's take a 3-minute break. There's going to be some music, some pictures from previous Health Day conferences. So do make yourself a coffee, stretch your legs, and we'll be back in 3 minutes. Kaj pa muska? Ja, če daš. Mikrofon ročno, mikrofon zvočnika. Jaz odštevam 3 minute, 2 minute pa pol še imamo. A imaš... Ne, ja, verjetno se vidi, ne? Lej, itak sta še samo 2 minuta pa pol je še pust, lej, ne se ukvarjati s tem. Okay, so the short break is over and we're going to continue with the program. For those of you who are English speaking, the next part of the conference is going to be in Slovene, but don't run away just yet, because after this short section, there is another lecture coming up in English. Torej, naslednji del bo potekal v slovenščini in od genetike bomo prišli na področje matičnih celic. Matične celice znanost pozna že več kot 50 let, v zadnjem desetletju pa ugotavljamo, kakšna je njihova praktična uporabnost. In naš naslednji govorec, Andrej Cer, iz ortopedske bolnišnice Valdoltra, bo povedal, kako so se tam lotili uvajanja inovativnega zdravljenja z mezenhimskimi matičnimi celicami. Torej, doktor Andrej Cer, lepo pozdravljeni. Ste z nami?
Ja, lepo pozdravljeni z obale. Upam, da se slišimo.
Slišimo se odlično, tako da zdaj pa beseda je vaša.
Zdaj bom še deliti moje diapozitive. Ko sem se pripravljal na to predavanje, vam moram povedati, na kaj sem pomislil. Pomislil sem, kako zelo si želim spet iti na kakšno dobro konferenco in kako zelo bi užival, če bi lahko predaval pred polno dvorano slušateljev. Upam, da se mi te želje čim hitreje uresničijo, ampak realnost je pač taka, kot je. Govoril bom o osteoartrozi, najpogostejši artrozi, in o mezenhimskih matičnih celicah in kako smo se pravzaprav lotili tega inovativnega zdravljenja pri nas v ortopedski bolnišnici Valdoltra. Osteoartroza je tegoba, globalen problem v celem svetu, zelo veliko število ljudi je prizadetih zaradi osteoartroze. Ocenjujejo, da približno 1/3 vseh ljudi, ki so stari 65 let, ima težave zaradi osteoartroze v enem ali v več velikih sklepov. Seveda se ta incidenca potem povečuje s samo starostjo. Približno 30 različnih terapevtskih pristopov danes poznamo za zdravljenje osteoartroze, pa vendar vsi ti terapevtski pristopi delujejo relativno kratek čas, odpravljajo bolečino relativno kratek čas, na dolgi rok pa pravzaprav nobene terapije, prave terapije, ki bi obnovila sklepni hrustanec, nimamo. Edino dobra rešitev, zelo dobra rešitev, ki pacientom odpravi kronične bolečine, ki jim izboljša njihovo gibljivost, je seveda zamenjava sklepa z umetno sklepno protezo. Teh menjav sklepov oziroma domeščanja z umetno sklepno protezo je z leti vse več. Ocenjujemo, da v Sloveniji ustavimo letno približno 7 do 8 tisoč sklepnih protez. Ocenjujemo, da se bo število še povečevalo za približno 40% vsako leto. Pa vendar, kljub temu, da so sklepne proteze rešile bolečin mnoge paciente, moramo vedeti, da tudi sklepne proteze niso večne. Sklepne proteze se zaradi takega ali drugačnega, je potrebno zaradi takega ali drugačnega razloga zamenjati po določenem času, nekatere prej, druge kasneje. Zato si želimo drugačnih terapevtskih pristopov. Takih terapevtskih pristopov, ki bodo zavrli strukturne spremembe oziroma strukturno napredovanje bolezni in obenem rešili paciente bolečin in izboljšali njihovo funkcijo njihovih sklepov. Pred približno 25 leti smo se začeli zanimati za mezenhimske matične celice, čeprav, kot je bilo rečeno, matične celice poznamo že bistveno dlje časa. Kaj nas je vzpodbudilo oziroma ortopede za to, da se povečano zanimajo za matične celice? To je dejstvo, da matične celice lahko se spremenijo v laboratoriju v celice sklepne hrustančevine, torej hondrocite. da lahko izdelujejo medceličnino in zdelo se nam je, da bi bila pa to idealna rešitev, da bi te celice potem omogočile obnovo sklepnega hrustanca. Na stotine raziskav trenutno poteka v laboratorijih, kjer poskušajo določiti, kakšni so mehanizmi delovanja mezenhimskih matičnih celic, in tudi cela vrsta študij v fazi 1A danes poteka, da bi v bistvu ugotovili, kako mezenhimske matične celice delujejo potem, ko jih damo enkrat v sklep. Tisto, kar smo se že naučili, stvari iz laboratorija niso vedno take, kot se potem dogajajo v samem sklepu. Kljub temu, da je bil napredek zelo velik, kljub temu, da smo odgovorili že na marsikatero vprašanje, pa vendar je ta napredek počasnejši, kot bi si pravzaprav želeli. Kako smo se v ortopedski bolnišnici Valdoltra srečali z mezenhimskimi matičnimi celicami? Leta 2017 smo bili povabljeni kot partner v Interreg projekt Italija-Slovenija z naslovom Ekosistem za napredne terapije na področju regenerativne medicine. In ideja se nam je zdela zanimiva, da bomo pacientom dali mezenhimske matične celice. Moram reči, da smo v projekt stopali precej naivno in da smo kasneje pristali nekajkrat na zelo, zelo trdnih tleh. Pravzaprav tisto, kar so mi rekli, ne govorim te naše izkušnje, kako smo potem poskušali od same ideje spraviti zdravljenje z mezenhimskimi matičnimi celicami potem seveda v realnost. Najprej, ko smo začeli s samim projektom, smo seveda morali narediti nek protokol. Najprej smo pristali na zelo trdih tleh, ko smo videli, kako draga je izdelava takega zdravila z mezenhimskimi matičnimi celicami. Ugotovili smo, da si več kot 10 pacientov sploh privoščiti ne moremo za denar, ki smo ga imeli na razpolago. Potem smo ugotovili, da v študijah, ki smo jih po literaturi pregledali, so protokoli zelo, zelo različni. Tukaj se vidi samo nekaj variabel v protokolih, kaj vse je spremenjeno v enem ali drugem, in zaradi tega si pravzaprav z protokoli, ki so trenutno že v študijah, nismo mogli veliko pomagati, mogli smo narediti svoj lasten protokol. Vprašali smo se, kaj pravzaprav želimo. Prva stvar je, želimo pacientom res dajati mezenhimske matične celice in to točno določeno število mezenhimskih matičnih celic. Odločili smo se za dozo približno 10 milijonov mezenhimskih matičnih celic. To pomeni, da vzamemo, v našem primeru smo se odločili, da bomo vzeli maščobno tkivo, v laboratoriju namnožili mezenhimske matične celice, jih okarakterizirali tako, kot zahteva Mednarodno združenje za terapijo celic s posebnimi markerji in potem aplicirali v bolnikovo koleno. Torej gre za seveda istega človeka, torej je to personalizirana oblika zdravljenja. Pacientu odvzamemo maščobno tkivo in vrnemo mezenhimske matične celice, seveda namnožene v njegovo obolelo koleno. Pripravili smo protokol zelo natančen, ker smo imeli na voljo denar samo za 10%, smo zelo natančno proučili vključitvene in izključitvene kriterije. Pacientom smo seveda želeli slediti, želimo imeti čim več informacij, želimo slediti na dolgi rok, torej vsaj 12 mesecev. Tukaj vidite, da smo prve kontrole naredili že po parih dneh, ker smo želeli vedeti, da ne bi bilo s pacienti karkoli narobe. Potem pa se je začelo mukotrpno birokratsko delo. Veste, zdravniki nismo najboljši pri tem birokratskem delu, moji kolegi kirurgi še toliko bolj ne. Zavedali smo se, da moramo najprej dobiti oceno etičnosti od Republiške komisije za medicinsko etiko. No, to smo dobili šele nekako v letu 2018. Potem smo ugotovili, da tako enostavno, da bomo samo vzeli maščobno tkivo, ga dali v laboratorij in potem aplicirali mezenhimske matične celice, ne bo šlo. Da v skladu z pravilnikom o pogojih za izdelavo in dovoljenje za opravljanje dejavnosti preskrbe s človeškimi tkivi in celicami, mora ortopedska bolnišnica Valdoltra postati donorski center za maščobo, z vsemi pravili, tako kot za vse druge donorske centre, čeprav seveda smo mi vzeli maščobno tkivo pri pacientu in bi vrnili istemu pacientu mezenhimske matične celice. Kar nekaj časa je trajalo, da smo postali tak donorski center, potem pa smo ugotovili, da tudi zdaj ne bomo mogli aplicirati takega zdravila, neratrinsko pripravljenega zdravila, saj zakon o zdravilih v svojem 72. in 73. členu zahteva, da se registriramo, kot zdravnik se mora registrirati, ki bo apliciral tako zdravilo. Že spet je bilo potrebno novo vlogo, pri tem seveda je potrebno takega zdravnika dodatno zavarovati. Tukaj smo imeli naslednjo težavo, da zavarovalnice niso bile ravno pripravljene nam priskočiti na pomoč in ponuditi nekaj, kar je zahtevala Javna agencija za zdravila in medicinske pripomočke. Če si zraven še predstavljate, da smo vmes morali narediti javno naročilo za izdelavo takega zdravila in vsi tisti, ki ste javno naročilo kdaj delali, veste, kaj to pomeni, potem vam je jasno, kaj smo delali pravzaprav 1 leto in pol. 1 leto in pol smo se ukvarjali z birokracijo in šele konec leta 2019 smo lahko odvzeli prvo maščobno tkivo in pripravili potem napredno zdravilo za paciente. Skratka, vzeli smo maščobno tkivo z liposukcijo, namnožili mezenhimske matične celice v posebnem sistemu NANT in na koncu točno določeno število, približno 10 milijonov celic, aplicirali v pacientovo koleno. Rekel sem, da smo želeli dejansko aplicirati mezenhimske matične celice. Mednarodno združenje za celično terapijo je pripravilo neka navodila, kdaj lahko res govorimo o mezenhimskih matičnih celicah in kdaj ne. Take celice morajo izpolnjevati 3 pogoje, morajo se med gojenjem pritrditi na podlago, morajo se diferencirati bodisi v maščobno tkivo, kostno tkivo in hrustančno tkivo ter izdelovati med celičnino, potem pa je cela vrsta markerjev, ki jih morajo izražati na svoji površini, nekatere morajo izražati, kot vidimo tukaj, in nekatere ne smejo izražati oziroma v zelo majhnih količinah. Vsako napredno zdravilo, predno ga apliciramo v koleno, potem celice takole okarakteriziramo, skratka zdravimo dejansko z mezenhimskimi matičnimi celicami. Projekt trenutno še traja in imamo rezultate sledenja bolnikov po 6 mesecih. Ni moj namen danes, da govorim o tem, kakšni so efekti. Lahko rečem, da je terapija varna, nobenih stranskih učinkov nismo imeli. Po 3 mesecih se stanje izboljšuje, vendar moramo počakati do konca sledenja, predvsem pa moramo počakati, da bomo na koncu pacientom naredili še kontrolno magnetno rezonanco, jo primerjali z tisto magnetno rezonanco pred samo aplikacijo celic in na ta način bomo potem lahko odgovorili na vprašanje, kako so vplivale matične celice pri naših pacientih. Zavedamo se, da imamo samo 10 pacientov, zato se poskušamo združevati z drugimi centri, ki delajo na podoben način. Obstajajo, danes potekajo večji projekti, kot je recimo DIPO-A2, protokoli njihovi in naši so primerljivi in na ta način, če bomo združili paciente, bomo lahko odgovorili na vprašanje, ali take mezenhimske matične celice na osteoartrozo dejansko delujejo ali ne. To, kar je napisal v svojem članku Frank Berry, pravzaprav z mezenhimskimi matičnimi celicami, ta zgodba še ni končana, mnogo smo se naučili, mnogo stvari še ne vemo in zelo jasno moramo povedati, da nismo v fazi, ko bi lahko ta produkcija celic in pa trg teh celic pravzaprav se močno razširil. Malo nas je streznil tale članek iz leta 2020 v Bone Journal, kjer govorijo o klinikah, ki zdravijo, ki ponujajo zdravljenje z mezihemskimi matičnimi celicami, ki to pravzaprav sploh niso. Za zaključek lahko rečem, da moramo delati pravzaprav skupaj, da moramo skupaj delati zdravniki pri pripravi seveda najboljših kliničnih protokolov, da morajo z nami sodelovati industrija, pripraviti morajo najboljše produkte, celične produkte, upamo, da kmalu tudi po malo nižjih cenah, predvsem pa mora z nami sodelovati regulatorji, torej Javna agencija za zdravila, in če bomo delali skupaj, si drugemu pomagali, bomo kmalu lahko prenesli tisto znanje, ki smo ga dobili v laboratoriju, dejansko v klinično prakso, seveda pa mora biti v centru vsega dobrobit naših bolnikov. Hvala lepa.
Najlepša hvala. Veliko vprašanj je torej še odprtih. Jaz bi morda vseeno vprašala, kakšna so vaša pričakovanja? Mogoče, kakšen je torej najbolj pozitiven možen scenarij in na drugi strani, če se stvari ne odvijajo, kot bi si želeli, kakšen bo izid?
Če se stvari ne bodo odvijali, kot bi si želeli, še vedno ustavljamo sklepne proteze, ki odrešijo bolečin mnoge bolnike in se ne bo spremenilo nič. Najboljši scenarij pa je seveda, da bo ta terapija postala, da bo najprej učinkovita, da bo postala dostopna in v tem primeru bodo naši kolegi ortopedi izgubili službo.
To je kar močna izjava. Jaz bi prosila tiste, ki ste še z nami, če se kdo želi dr. Ceru pridružiti v breakout roomu za dodatna pojasnila, dodatno debato, to sporočite v chat. Mi pa s programom spet nadaljujemo v angleščini. So, dear audience, we are now going to continue in English again. And I'm happy to announce that our next speaker was kind enough to wake up at 6 a.m. in the morning just to be able to be with us today directly from Los Angeles. Wojin, hello, are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
I'm trying to find you. Okay, yes, I can see you. So, good morning. Did you have your morning coffee yet?
Yes, I just did.
Okay, perfect. So for everyone, Wojin Kim is a musculoskeletal radiologist, an imaging informaticist who until recently worked as the Chief Medical Information Officer at Nuance Communications, which is the pioneer and leader in conversational innovations. And this is also the company that acquired one of Wojin's companies. Apart from what I already mentioned, Wojin is also a very skilled entrepreneur who just recently established yet another company. So Wojin, I really think we're going to have to invite you here again to talk about entrepreneurship, but that's not why you're here today. We invited you here today to talk about how a value-based care approach is translating in radiology. So please tell us more.
Great.
Are we still on the line?
Yeah, I believe you guys have the recording.
We do. We thought you're gonna present live. So is that possible?
Yeah, sure. I just
that was
to...
more as a backup. So if it's not too much to ask, yeah.
Okay. All right. Sure. Let me just share my screen.
Yeah, that would be great.
except I don't have the control. I'm not seeing anything actually.
In the bottom of the screen, there's no share screen option.
I'm not actually seeing you guys either.
Maybe the best thing would be to rejoin the Zoom chat again.
Let me see if I can do this. Hopefully you'll be able to see it.
We can see the slides, so we're making progress.
Okay, great. Let's see. Okay, I guess I'll do this way. All right. So you guys can see the slides.
Yeah, we can see the slides. We can hear you well. So
okay,
go ahead.
We'll get started. Again, hello, my name is Woojin Kim. First, I'd like to thank the organizers for this opportunity to speak at this event. Today, I wanted to talk about value-based radiology. First, the disclosures. So in my presentation, I'll first discuss what value-based healthcare is, followed by what value-based radiology is. Then I'll share how one can practically deliver value-based radiology using technology solutions. Given my background, I'll be sharing value-based radiology from the perspective of and experiences from the United States. Also, as a clarification, I will be using the terms value-based radiology and value-based imaging interchangeably in my presentation. Value-based healthcare has been a hot topic, not just in the United States, but around the world. So first question is, what is it? According to the New England Journal of Medicine Catalyst, it is a healthcare delivery model in which providers, including hospitals and physicians, are paid based on patient health outcomes. This is a paradigm shift from the traditional payment model where it was more fee-for-service, meaning you get paid for performing a service regardless of the patient outcomes. With this model, to get reimbursed, you also need to demonstrate value. This figure from the article shows you some of the benefits of value-based healthcare. As you can see from some of the benefits, besides better patient outcomes, one of the main components of value-based healthcare is reducing cost. Now, there is no denying that the cost is an important consideration and driver in value-based care. The US healthcare spending reached $3.6 trillion in 2018, representing about 17.8% of US GDP. It is expected to reach 19.4% by 2027. And as you can imagine, this kind of growth in cost is simply not sustainable. Now that you have a basic understanding of value-based healthcare, let's talk about value-based radiology. But before I talk about value-based radiology, let's first make sure everybody understands what radiology exactly is and what radiologists do. After all, according to a survey that was done in the United States, a lot of people don't know what radiologists do. And also many don't know that radiologists are actually physicians. So let me illustrate with an example. Let's say John goes skiing and injures his knee. John will go and see a doctor who will order an X-ray and then an MRI exam of the knee. After John gets his X-ray and MRI, another doctor will interpret those imaging exams. This doctor is the radiologist, and radiology is a field that deals with such medical imaging. Now, in 2018, Insights into Imaging published a summary of the European Society of Radiology International Forum that focused on the very topic of value-based radiology. This article nicely summarizes the situation of value-based radiology from different parts of the world. Several years ago in the United States, the American College of Radiology initiated something called Imaging 3.0. This initiative was a roadmap to transition the practice of radiology from volume-based to value-based care. Other transitions included going from transactional to consultative, from radiology center to patient center, from interpretation focused to outcomes focused, from commoditized to integrated, and from invisible to accountable imaging care. The article Strategies for Radiology to Thrive in the Value Era shares some practical approaches to transitioning into value-based radiology. The authors emphasize the need to understand the needs of referring clinicians and patients. The radiologists need to be true consulting physicians and also excellent communicators. And instead of being individualistic, they advocated the need to work as a team. They also recommended reducing inappropriate recommendations and unnecessary imaging exams. And finally, they advised radiologists to improve their value in tangible, demonstrable ways while leveraging information technology platforms. Given that this conference audience is in digital health, I'd like to discuss how one can deliver value-based radiology using technology. Before I begin, we first need to define value. The simplest equation many people use is the following, which is value equals quality over cost. Indeed, in this article I had shared earlier in my talk, they also define the value as health outcomes achieved for patients relative to the cost of achieving them. This means that if you want to increase value, you need to either increase quality and outcomes, decrease costs, or some combination of both. Okay, but how do you do this and accomplish this in a more practical fashion? Well, I'm going to share one suggestion, but before I do, let me first expand a little bit more on what value is. In Thomas Davenport's book, Big Data at Work, he identified 3 classes of value. They are cost reductions, decision improvements, and improvements in products and services. An article published in CIO defined business intelligence and analytics as a set of techniques and tools to analyze organizations' raw data into meaning and useful information to cut costs, improve decision-making, and identify and develop new business opportunities. So, okay, now what I want to do is let's put this definition of analytics on one side. And then let's compare these with Davenport's 3 classes of value on the other side. When you do this, you notice something interesting. They both reduce costs, they both improve decision-making, and they both enhance business through improvements and new opportunities. What I wanted to show you is that there is a very close relationship between analytics and value. In fact, Dr. Shrestha said you can't push for value-based imaging without having the right sets of measures and analytics in place. In 2014, a Journal of the American College of Radiology article on this topic of value-based imaging described what is called an imaging value chain. A value chain is a concept borrowed from Michael Porter's well-known book, Competitive Advantage, Creating and Sustaining Superior Performance, where each chain's link represents a discrete number of unique value opportunity activities that can drive competitive advantage. This figure in the article is a schematic representation of this imaging value chain. Now, what I want you to do is take a look at what is in the center. And that's right. Interconnected with every link in this chain is data mining and business intelligence, highlighting their utmost importance in value-based radiology. Now, analytics in radiology typically focus on operational metrics like volume and turnaround times. And turnaround time is a metric that tells how quickly radiology reports are generated. I suspect these metrics get used a lot in other countries besides the United States. However, as you can see, these metrics reflect a volume-based focus. In value-based care, your analytic solution need to go beyond these operational metrics, focus solely, beyond these operational metrics that are solely focused on volume. The analytic solutions need to also focus on quality and patient outcomes. So question is, how can you do these using analytics? Well, one way is by analyzing the primary work product of radiologists. Remember the skiing example I gave you earlier? Well, the radiologist generated a report that contains his or her interpretations. In radiology, you can use analytics such as advanced text analytics to analyze for quality of those reports using natural language processing. For example, that can, things that can affect the radiology report's quality, such as left and right errors within the radiology reports, or when radiologist says prostate and it's a woman, or uterus and ovaries when it's a man. Often radiologists will make a recommendation in the report, and analytics can make sure these recommendations are evidence-based and that the recommendations are appropriately followed up. When radiologists make an urgent finding, you will want to ensure that they are appropriately communicated, and analytics can ensure proper documentation of notification and help you comply with any local rules regarding this. Looking at steps even before radiology reports are generated, analytics can also help appropriate imaging exams get ordered by the ordering physicians. Finally, one of the hottest topics today is artificial intelligence, as you all probably agree. So how does AI fit into value-based radiology is the next question. Well, last year in the AI in medical imaging book, I wrote a chapter that focuses on this particular topic. Remember this particular figure, imaging value chain from earlier. Well, the other thing to notice about this figure is that radiology is more than just interpretation and reporting. The value chain involves every aspect of medical imaging, from when the referring clinician orders the imaging exam to scheduling, obtaining the images, interpreting, reporting, and communicating back to the referring clinician. Well, for that book chapter I wrote, I borrowed this figure and modified it to create something I called an AI imaging value chain to highlight how AI can positively impact all aspects of imaging value chain, including analytics. So in conclusion, value-based healthcare is a hot topic in medicine today, not just in the US, but worldwide. Radiologists transitioning from volume-based care to value-based care, and you can increase value by increasing quality and patient outcomes or decreasing costs or both. While there are many ways to achieve this, one way using technology is to use and leverage analytics. Both analytics and AI can impact every aspect of radiology's value chain to improve patient outcomes while decreasing costs. And thank you for your kind attention, and please feel free to reach out to me.
Thank you, Eugene. The same as John, you will be interviewed by an external expert, and I'm happy to announce Žiga Špiclin. So Žiga Špiclin is the assistant professor at the Department of Biomedical Engineering at the Faculty of Electrical Engineering of the University of Ljubljana. He's also the co-founder of Quantim, a startup that designs state-of-the-art algorithms to deliver clinically helpful quantitative imaging biomarkers. So, Dr. Špiclin, please tell us, what kind of questions did you prepare for Eugene?
Okay, so first of all, I would like to thank for this opportunity to the organizers so that I can be in the interview, and also I would like to thank you, Eugene Kim, for this very interesting talk. I was really amazed by the figure that you showed at the end, which is the value-based chain, which gives somehow a holistic view of patient treatment and patient management. I think it really addresses the main problem in healthcare, which is the fragmentation of care, and it highlights the gaps in the clinical workflow, which we might not have thought of before. So for instance, you mentioned team communication, patient scheduling, and so on. These are the things you think that in a healthcare system are already good taken care of, but this is not necessarily so and can be improved. So I would maybe pose the first question is, what in your experience, maybe in a specific or general case, would be the largest contributors to value in such a chain?
So really, to be honest with you, a lot of people are thinking about quality. And when you look at that value equation, quality over cost, a lot of people are trying to figure out how to deliver, quality care. And the trouble is that it is very difficult to define quality. It's one of those things, cost is much more easier. It's much easier to quantify because you know how much it costs, and you can either generate more revenue or decrease costs for the health systems and also for the patients themselves, reducing how much they have to pay for their healthcare. But as far as the quality goes, that's exactly the area that people are really focusing on. But it is very difficult to define. So I can tell you, just in the United States, there's a lot of focus on creating quote unquote quality metrics. so that people can, sort of report back to the government or to the payers as far as, to prove that, hey, you know what, we are providing quality healthcare. But the thing is, the trouble is, what is that exactly? Just because you mention certain things in the reports doesn't necessarily equate to quality. Yet, people get credit, like, okay, you mentioned it, therefore I'm going to give you some, points for that. But I think the real challenge right now, even though a lot of people are, to your question, focused on coming up with these quality metrics, the real question is, what is exactly affecting the patient outcome? That is the ultimate question. And it's been really challenging to figure out, how to come up with these metrics that can actually quantify, quote unquote, outcomes. And to that point, I will say, one of the reasons why that is also difficult is that, health outcome is very difficult to also get from the medical records. I'm not sure how it is over there, but I can tell you, despite everything being quote unquote digital, it is very difficult to see how patient does in the end, because everything is really focused on, a lot of times, unfortunately, especially in the United States, when it comes to, say, the electronic medical records, it was really originally designed for billing purposes, not so much for, really patient outcome. And because of that, trying to translate that to patient outcome has been challenging.
I mean, if I can add to this answer, maybe from my point of view, I think there are many contributors, I guess, to value, as you said, but they are on a different timeline. So I guess the quality is measured on a completely different timeline than the cost. I mean, it's easy to see how you reduce the cost and then improve value in the short term, but the quality typically is related to patient outcomes, which are usually measured on the larger timescales. I mean, I'm in the field of neurology, and this is really a bottleneck also to penetrate into the market and deliver a clear indication that the technology has the benefit, because the outcomes are difficult to demonstrate in the short term. So maybe if I also add to the figure that you had, I feel that one of the main contributors to value would also be that there is contextual information from all aspects of care put together, and based on those you can actually improve patient care. But this is related to my next question. Could this introduce a bias in the process? For instance, you maybe know an example which is maybe not so related to healthcare, but it's related to this question. You all know Amazon, and you know that the Amazon would follow our preferences, habits, and shopping lists. And there were stories that they actually can determine which female users are pregnant even before they know that they're pregnant. And the same can actually happen if you have a lot of contextual information about a patient to actually set the diagnosis before it actually is there, right? So this can introduce substantial bias. And I was thinking, do you perceive this as a potential threat with this kind of approach, and what would be the strategies to mitigate this bias?
Yeah, so I mean, you're from Qantas, so I know you have to deal with a lot of data and artificial intelligence. And so the other topic that I talk very frequently, besides this particular topic, and also about the entrepreneurship, is actually artificial intelligence in medical imaging. And so bias, as you said, is extremely important. So giving you the example of Amazon, for example, it's one of the things that people found out was that if you put it in your resume, anything that relates to a female. So for example, if you played on a women's volleyball team, for example, then the algorithm will flag that and actually will rank you lower in terms of hiring process. So when they discover that bias, they had to shut that off, And in healthcare, you can introduce all kinds of bias, not only in terms of, gender bias, but also things like, the one example that I saw recently when it comes to using AI is, let's say you're trying to have the AI figure out whether the skin lesion that you took a picture of is cancer or not, like a melanoma or not. And it turns out that it turns out that one of the AI companies used a data set where when a dermatologist thinks this is a cancer, they would actually use a marker on the skin. And so the AI algorithm, instead of just picking up what the cancer should look like on your scan, the algorithm learned that if you put a marking, then there's probably a good chance that this is, a cancer. So when the researchers put, markers on, they noticed that the algorithm suddenly increased the probability of cancerous skin lesions. So whether it's intentional bias or unintentional bias, it can seriously have downstream effect when it comes to, not only AI applications, but also value-based care as well. So bias, unfortunately, is prevalent everywhere. Healthcare is no different. But the really negative thing is that it can really severely negatively affect everything we do in healthcare. So one thing is that we need to acknowledge that they exist. And second thing is that we have to be very aggressive in terms of looking for them, whether we are, using data to, use it for AI model development, or whether you use it to determine what is quality and how we quantify the kind of care we deliver to patients. We really need to be conscious of the bias, and every time we look at it, we have to go back and try to fix it. But we can't obviously get rid of all the bias, but I think as long as we know that they exist, so that we don't inadvertently treat males differently than females, or wealthy patients differently than less wealthy patients.
Okay, thank you. So I would maybe ask the last question before I put the word to maybe others who have probably good questions as well. So in order to implement the imaging value chain, there are different approaches. So you can go step by step and implement specific sub-services, or go full-blown and implement the whole analytics platform. So if you maybe can share some information whether such platforms exist. I would assume that they exist in some kind of form for the inpatient setting, but what about the outpatient setting, which is much more difficult, but again, I guess it's you can maximize the value more directly in such a setting.
So so the company that was mentioned during the introduction that I had created was in analytics space. So that's the startup that I had that I was able to sell to a larger company. And one of the challenges when it comes to analytics, whether it's inpatient or outpatient, it's much easier to deal with what's called the structured data. So for example, if you get a blood pressure and it shows you 120/80, well, we know that 120 is systolic, 80 is diastolic, and everything gets stored in a structured fashion. So it's very easy for me to create an application that says, okay, show me all the hypertensive patients, right? What is really challenging is what's called unstructured data. And in healthcare, it's no different than what's out there in the real world. So if you look at your data that's around you, that you generate, great majority of the data that you generate are actually unstructured, like your email messages, your text messages, everything. So in healthcare, about 80% of the healthcare data is actually unstructured. And that's a huge area that you can't really mine, very difficult to mine. But that's the area that I focused on when I started the last company. And it is a very challenging field, but it is also a gold mine for any type of analytics you want to do, whether you want to use it to improve quality, or you wanted to, do it to affect the costs or, the revenue of the health system, whether it's inpatient or outpatient. So one of the things I recommend is that, yes, there are solutions out there, both commercial and homegrown, that focuses on unstructured data. And so one of the things that I would like the audience to pay more attention is hopefully that, there are analytic solutions. And if you've been following the AI world, for example, there's been a tremendous amount of improvement in natural language processing over the last 2 years. And so that's the area that I would say you guys should probably focus on and really try to bring that into the healthcare, because like I said, 80% of the data is pretty much unstructured, or even more than 80%. And that is a huge area that needs to be tapped using technology like advanced analytics to deliver value-based healthcare.
Okay, so thank you very much for the answer. So if there's anyone in the crowd, maybe please come forward with the questions.
in the chat, we have one more thing on schedule today. First of all, of course, Eugene and Žiga, thank you very much.
I think we can't hear you well.
Hello?
Yeah, I don't think your microphone's on. We could sort of hear you.
Can you hear me now?
No, not yet.
Not well, not well.
Hello?
Oh, well.
What about now?
Perfect.
You know,
Perfect.
I guess there's never an online conference that would be flawless when it comes to tech stuff. So I apologize for that. First of all, thank you, Eugene, and thank you, Dr. Spitzlin, for this nice discussion. Now, anyone who wants to join Eugene and Dr. Spitzlin for further discussion, please indicate that in the chat and you will be added to a breakout room with them. Since we are not together live and we can't take a break and, you know, do a little bit of networking, you're now all gonna be divided in small breakout rooms to chat a little bit. This is going to be very short, so just 5 minutes. Get ready, talk a little bit more about value-based care, and then we're gonna go to the round table with some of the speakers that are with us now. So, you know, just mingle a little bit.
Ja, pozdravljeni. Zdravo. Nihče se ne pogovarja.
Aha, jaz bi tudi lahko govoril.
Ja, zdravo.
Po mojem ne smem preveč na glas govoriti, ker me tukaj pol drugi slišijo.
Končno je pogovor s tem.
Živja.
Ja.
Živja. Živja.
Ja, zdravo.
Ja, sej, zato bom pa zaključil, zdaj hitro. To je. Živa, Dejan.
Bravo.
Pa nas, Gregor, pa nas ti moderiraš.
Kako?
Ja, kdo?
Živa. Ja, 12 skupin smo odprli, cirka 80 nas je tukaj na Zoomu, zdaj še vedno noter.
Slišimo.
Tako da se sliši. Ja. Tako da jaz upam, bomo videli, kakšne so izkušnje. No. Po mojem v nekaterih skupinah je stekel pogovor, v nekaterih pa pač ne.
Če nas moderiraš.
Ne, ni moderacije, to je zdaj odprto, bomo pa zaprli kmalu to skupino.
Aha.
Coffee chat.
Ja, jaz sem se pridružil letos prvič na taki konferenci.
Ok, zapiramo.
Aha, ok. Ok, dio.
Adijo.
Nihče ne kontrolira, kakšen je potem končni izhod. Se pravi, naš sistem s tem nima nobene zveze. Še enkrat bom morda ponovil prvo uvodno predavanje, to je zanimivo, človeštvo se premalo uči iz zgodovine. Marsikaj je bilo že narejenega, pa smo potem čez 100 več let čudovine.
Zdaj je bilo 15 sekund.
Jaz mislim, da možnosti so povsod mogoče, vprašanje pa je, ni vprašanje, ali kaj mogoče ali ne mogoče. Vprašanje
Mislim, da smo si nakopali neki jezo vseh skupaj, tako da.
Zakaj jezo? A niso delali breakouti, ali kaj?
Pa sliši se posnetek vaš čas.
A se slišimo?
Okay.
Ja, se.
Evo, a smo zdaj že vsi nazaj? Mislim, da smo.
Te slišimo, ja.
Te slišimo?
Nas slišite?
Ja, se slišimo. Vsi smo bili vrženi v breakout.
Tako je, sej to je bil namen, da se tudi med sabo malo spoznate, a ne, sicer smo malo bolj sramežljivi, se mi zdi ponavadi, ampak upam, da ste vseeno prišli vsaj do tega, da ste se malo predstavili med sabo. No, zdaj pa smo prišli še do zadnje točke današnje konference in to je okrogla miza, ki jo bo vodil Sašo Novak, zdravstveni svetovalec z dolgoletnimi izkušnjami dela v farmacevtski in zdravstveno-zavarovalniški industriji. Jaz se bom zdaj predstavila, samo za sekundo. Evo, vidite nas Kot vidite, smo v zelo okrnjeni zasedbi, zato ker bodo nekateri panelisti z nami kar prek spleta. Torej, z nami je Sašo, ki bo moderiral tole okroglo mizo. V živo se nam je pridružil tudi direktor bolnišnice Topolšica Jurij Šorli. Najlepša hvala, ker ste prišli sem. Bosta pa v okrogli mizi sodelovali še Maja Južnič-Sotlar, podpredsednica Združenja Evropa Kolon, ki zastopa bolnike z raki prebavil, in pa Anka Bolka, direktorica področja za analitiko in razvoj na Zdravstveni zavarovalnici Slovenije, na ZZZS-ju, in pa Tina Dragan, direktorica področja za zdravstvena zavarovanja pri zavarovalnici Sava. Nažalost sta se nam opravičila gospod Vojko Flis, direktor UKC Ljubljana, zaradi trenutnih razmer na koncu ni mogel priti. Prav tako gospa Jelka Godec, državna sekretarka za zdravstvo v kabinetu predsednika vlade. Seja vlade se je zavlekla, zato tudi ona ni mogla priti, ampak imamo tudi druge govorce, tako da ne dvomim, da bo debata zelo zanimiva. Vse, ki poslušate, pa spet pozivam, da svoja vprašanja že zdaj pošiljate v chat, da jih bomo videli, potem pa bo seveda ostalo še nekaj minut po razpravi, da tudi temu namenimo nekaj časa. Zdaj pa Sašo, beseda je tvoja.
Tjaša, najlepša hvala za tole predstavitev in pozdrav vsem udeležencem konference, kot tudi mojim sogovornikom. Zdaj, skoraj vse ključne deležnike zdravstvenega sistema nam je uspelo zbrati v to okroglo mizo, z izjemo teh, ki so v zadnjem trenutku bili odtegnjeni zaradi svojih obveznosti, in veselim se vaših razmišljanj. V konceptu Value-Based Healthcare je integracija deležnikov izjemno pomembna. S tem se ustrezno vrednoti izide zdravstvene oskrbe, kar vpliva tudi na uvajanje inovacij v zdravstvu. Zato smo si danes kot neko izhodišče sestavili vprašanje, kaj vse razumemo pod izide zdravljenja. Mogoče gospa Južnič, če začnemo kar pri predstavnikih bolnikov, ki so v centru zdravstvenega sistema, kaj vse je za bolnika pomembno v procesu zdravljenja?
Dober dan vsem skupaj. Najprej bi sem preverila, če se slišimo.
Slišimo, tukaj te slišimo. Hvala.
Hvala lepa, Sašo, za besedo. Moram reči, da sem zelo velikim zanimanjem in pozornostjo spremljala celotno konferenco, ker so se seveda ves čas odvijale na njej stvari, ki so vse bolj aktualne, tako v evropskem kot v slovenskem merilu. Zelo me tudi veseli, da se vse več govori o tako imenovanih patient centricity oziroma patients first, kar bi pravzaprav moralo biti že leta in desetletja. Do zdaj smo namreč zdravili bolj bolezen, se mi zdi, kot pa bolnika, zdaj se k sreči ta koncept vendarle spreminja. Ko govorimo o izidih zdravljenja in o oceni le-teh, se mi zdi, da se tukaj močno razlikuje to, kar je pomembno za stroko, kar je pomembno za zavarovalnico, kar je pomembno za industrijo, nenazadnje, in pa to, kar je pomembno za bolnika. Oba koncepta, čeprav se seveda združujeta, se zelo razlikujeta istočasno. Za stroko se mi zdi, da je vedno pomembno končni izid, kar pomeni, kako uspešno so nekoga pozdravili, kako uspešno so nekomu podaljšali preživetje in življenje. Za zavarovalnico je seveda pomembno, da je čim bolj poceni, za industrijo, da so zdravila čim bolj učinkovita. Kaj pa je pomembno za pacienta? Za pacienta pogosto ni pomembno ne to, kaj jemlje, kako sodobno je, kako personalizirano je, pomembno je, kako je on zadovoljen oziroma kako je ta bolnik zadovoljen z tem, kaj je zdravilo naredilo v njegovem življenju. Kako on živi s to svojo boleznijo, ali lahko dela, ali lahko počne vse to, kar je počel prej, ali se lahko, bom rekla, druži z ljudmi, se lahko, rekla, posveča svojim vnukom, svojim hobijem. Za njega je pomembno, kakšno izkušnjo je imel, ko je bil v bolnišnici, kako dostopen je bil njegov zdravnik, kako se je z njim pogovarjal, kako je mu dal možnost, da je lahko soodločal pri procesih zdravljenja. Skratka, vrsta stvari, o katerih se mi zdi, da smo do zdaj vsaj premalo, če sploh ne razmišljali, ko smo govorili o kakovosti zdravljenja oziroma obravnave, če govorimo o raku raka. Nadalje se mi zdi pomembno tudi to, da se začne razmišljati in govoriti o tem, da je kakovost zdravljenja merjena tudi po tem, kako uspešno je bilo obvladovano obravnava ob koncu življenja, ker vemo, da rak je bolezen, ki se ne izide vedno dobro, in veliko ljudi žal še vedno umre. Kako uspešno je bilo torej na koncu življenja obravnavana simptomatika, zlasti bolečina, zaprtje, bruhanje, kako je zdravstveno osebje pristopilo k bolniku in nenazadnje, kar tudi zelo pogosto pozabljamo, k njegovim svojcem. Svojci so namreč sekundarni pacienti, ki jih bolezen ravno tako močno prizadene in zajame v ta tok obravnave kot primarne paciente, ki dobijo svojo diagnozo. In vse te stvari se mi zdi, da bi morali tudi upoštevati ob tem, ko se pogovarjamo o zdravstvenih izidih in o kakovosti celotne obravnave.
Hvala, Maja. Deloma si s tem že odgovorila tudi na moje drugo vprašanje, se pravi, ti dejavniki so pomembni tudi z vidika ocenjevanja in inovacij v zdravljenju, če prav razumem.
Ja, definitivno. Mislim, da bi vsaj od zdaj naprej morali biti bolj upoštevani in tudi so. Lahko z veseljem povem, da je Slovenija tudi se že vključila v določene evropske pilotne projekte, ki se osredotočajo ravno na to, torej na izkušnjo pacientov, tako s celim zdravstvenim sistemom, kot z samim zdravljenjem kot takim. To se dogaja, pod kraticama PREMS oziroma PROMS, Patient Reported Experience Measures and Patient Reported Outcomes. In kot sem rekla, me veseli, da se to vedno bolj upošteva tudi širše gledano, se pravi, da to upoštevajo odločevalci, da se o tem pogovarjajo zavarovalnice, da se o tem pogovarja industrija in seveda tudi klinična stroka. In imam občutek, da glede na obsežnost tega, kar se dogaja na evropskem nivoju, mislim, da ni daleč čas, ko se bomo začeli tudi v Sloveniji ne samo o tem pogovarjati, ampak tudi delati, konkretne projekte, ki bodo upoštevali tudi ta vidik čisto formalno.
Zanimivo je to, tukaj me zanima PROMS in PREMS, ki si jih omenila. Ali so te pilotni projekti šele v oblikovanju ali se tudi že kje uporabljajo dejansko za ocenjevanje nekako pogledov bolnikov na sam sistem zdravljenja v Sloveniji, zdaj tukaj, če smo konkretni?
Govorimo samo za Slovenijo, ja. Zdaj v okviru tega pilotnega projekta se je oblikoval kar obsežen vprašalnik, ki so ga nekatere bolnišnice že vzele za svojega in ga že, kot vem, dajejo tudi svojim bolnikom. Kaj se bo s tem konkretno zgodilo, kot smo dobili tisti, ki smo v tej širši delovni skupini informacijo, naj bi bila potem to zelo dragocena kažipot, za te bolnišnice, da lahko od zdaj naprej upoštevajo tudi vidik bolnika in njegove izkušnje z vsemi tistimi kriteriji, ki sem jih uvodoma naštela, da to upoštevajo in seveda skušajo v svoje vsakdanje delo in izboljšati določene stvari, o katerih se mogoče do zdaj ni ali pa vsaj premalo razmišljalo.
Hvala, Maja. Pa če zdaj tukaj mogoče nadaljujemo pri predstavniku zdravstvene ustanove, dr. Šorli, katere izide zdravljenja merite v vaši ustanovi, pa mogoče pod vprašanje tukaj, a vidite smisel merjanja elementov kvalitete življenja in zadovoljstva bolnikov z zdravljenjem kot kriterij ocenjevanja inovacij v zdravstvu?
Zagotovo so vse te meritve pomembne in jih je potreba uvajati. Kaj danes izvajamo? Relativno malo tega. Gledamo kriterije uspešnosti zdravljenja glede na število rehospitalizacij, dni v bolnišnici, zapletov zdravljenja, porabljeni terapiji, porabljeni antibiotični terapiji, število skladnosti antibiotične terapije z samimi izvidi antibiogramov in podobnega. Same kvalitete življenja kot take ocenjujemo zelo redko. Prvič zaradi tega, ker v naši bolnišnici v glavnem zdravimo bolnike z akutnimi poslabšanji, pri katerih je trenutno stanje, v katerem pridejo, tako, da je sama ocena kvalitete oziroma pričakovane kvalitete relativno težka. Nekaj tega izvajamo v nekih procesih, kot je rehabilitacija, pri katerih nam je pa prišlo včasih do zelo paradoksnih rezultatov, da so bili bolniki po zaključeni terapiji v bistvu ocenili svojo kvaliteto življenja slabšo kot v začetku. Zlasti zaradi tega, ker v začetku niso niti vedeli, kaj naj pričakujejo od svojega življenja, in ko so bili seznanjeni s tem, kaj v bistvu bi vse morali v svojih letih še početi, so bili potem, ko so nekako ugotovili, da tega ne morejo več, bistveno bolj razočarani kot pred tem. Za primer, hudi bolniki z okvarami pljuč so bili pred samo rehabilitacijo povsem zadovoljni, da so sedeli v stolu in gledali televizijo. So jim pa pokazali, da je pač njihovo življenje normalno, da grejo v trgovino, da si prinesejo stvari sami domov, da upravljajo sprehode, se igrajo z vnuki, so bili po rehabilitaciji, kljub temu, da je bila njihova zmogljivost večkrat boljša za večkratnik boljša kot pred samo rehabilitacijo, pa je kvaliteta življenja padla, zaradi tega, ker so kar enkrat videli, da drugi pa zmorejo več. Tako da te meritve seveda so pomembne, jih je treba uvrstiti v kontekst zdravljenja. Pri samih inovacijah, bom pa tako rekel, je tle en izredno kompleksen sistem stvari, s katerimi te stvari zaznavamo in merimo. Ker pa je ta trenutek največji problem je to, da naš plačnik pretežno plačuje izvedbo storitve, ne pa njenega rezultata.
Ja, en pomemben element, se pravi, je tudi plačevanje v zdravstvenem sistemu. Zato mogoče za vas, dr. Šorli, naslednje vprašanje bi se vam zdelo smiselno, da se pri ustanovah, ki dosegajo boljše celovite izide zdravljenja, se pravi z vsem tem, kar je že Maja predstavila tudi kot pričakovanja pacientov, da bi se to odražalo tudi pri plačilu storitev, v smislu pay for performance.
Mislim, da je treba kompleksno cel sistem plačevanja spremeniti. Mislim, da je bilo že prevečkrat omenjeno, da smo zgolj plačani po storitvah in v temu noter je manevrskega prostora za neke izboljšave malo. Ker smo tudi mi pri nas gledali izvide zadovoljstva bolnikov, je večina želela izboljšanje hrane, izboljšanje storitev v bolnišnici v smislu postelj, televizije in podobnega. Vse te stvari zahtevajo pomemben dvig cene storitve in jo v sam sistem zelo težko uvedemo noter, če vemo, da z plačilom, ki ga dobimo za opravljeno storitev, težko pokrijemo kader, kaj šele vse ostale stvari, ki zraven sodijo. In Slovenija v zadnjih skoraj 25 letih nekega tehnološkega sledenja svetu ni mogla dosegati, saj smo vse sredstva namenjali praktično samo za plačevanje kadra in je tudi tisto, kar nas bo zdaj najbolj tepalo. Če sam za primer povem za informatizacijo bolnišnic, bolnišnica ne dobi niti centa, malo drugače za ambulanto in je vse, kar se na tem področju naredi, strošek bolnišnice same, ki ga mora prihraniti pri ostalih stvarih.
Ja, ampak mogoče še sam malo pojasnim še to vprašanje, ta pay for performance, verjetno med različnimi zdravstvenimi ustanovami dosegamo različne, recimo lahko izide. In kako gledate na to, da bi bilo nekako ustrezno nagrajeno tisti, ki dosegajo boljše izide, bi to lahko po vašem mnenju?
Seveda bi morali to narediti. V prvi vrsti treba seveda ugotoviti, kaj so vstopni podatki, kaj gre in kako ločimo posamezne storitve. Počem z primera, ki je meni bolj domač, pljučnica. Pljučnica pri 25-letniku ni enaka pljučnice pri 85-letniku in nekdo, ki bo zdravil samo 25-letnike, bo zagotovo imel povsem drugačen rezultat, kot nekdo, ki bo zdravil 85-letnike. Torej je treba te vstopne kriterije zelo dobro definirati in glede na te tudi rezultate zdravljenja. Ker v nasprotnem primeru bomo prišli do tega, da tisti, ki bodo obravnavali relativno malo zapletene bolnike, bodo za njih dobili bistveno bolje plačano, kot tisti, ki bodo obravnavali zelo kompleksne bolnike, se bo pri njih že iz izhodišča pričakovan rezultat zdravljenja slabši. Ampak te stvari se vse da narediti, v tujini imajo te stvari zelo dobro opredeljene in ne vem, zakaj se tega ne bi dali tudi pri nas narediti. Seveda, posledično je treba tudi zelo dobro povedati, kaj od posamezne preiskave pričakujemo, kaj je obseg posamezne preiskave, ki jo izvedemo in kje se ta preiskava konča in se začne nek drug postopek v tem primeru in tudi te stvari na koncu vrednotiti. Se pravi, če je ena endoskopska preiskava, kot je gastroskopija, ovrednotena kot zgolj pregled nekega sistema, se pravi požiralnika, želodca in dvanajsternika, je povsem drugače, kot če istočasno vrednotimo še odvzete materijale. Tako da stvari je treba tudi pri vseh teh stvarih zelo natančno definirati in temu tudi cenovno vrednotiti. Tle smo še kar precej za nekim svetom zahodnim, tako da tle bomo morali prvi vrsti te stvari urediti in se istočasno prilagoditi vsemu, kar se od nas zahteva. Tle pa mislim zlasti na bolniku prilagojeno medicino. Mi danes se v medicini ukvarjamo pretežno statistiko, zdravljenje statističnih podatkov in zelo malo z bolnikom. Tle bomo morali narediti korak proti bolniku z zlasti zbiranjem večje količine podatkov in delovanje teh podatkov in tudi s temu bolniku stopiti naproti. Bomo morali pa tudi izobraziti populacijo. Danes naši uporabniki prepogosto zdravstveni sistem razumevajo prek tistega, kar vidijo v televiziji, ne tistega, kar v realnosti zdravstveni sistem lahko ponuja. In je zaradi tega tudi pričakovanja zelo različna. Lepo predstavnica bolnikov povedala, kaj si bolniki želijo in kje si tega želijo. Ampak, ko pridemo na konec na pravno področje, smo pa daleč od tega. Dovolj je, da se eden od svojcev obregne v to, da neka preiskava, ki bolniku v njegovi kvaliteti ne bi spremenila ničesar, ni bila izvedena in že se sprožijo sodni mlini, zakaj to ni bilo narejeno. In to se pri nas prepogosto dogaja, da skregani svojci silijo medicino v defenzivno in bolniku neprijazno delovanje.
Zdaj bi nadaljevali z gospod Bolka iz Zavoda za zdravstveno zavarovanje Slovenije. Tukaj na sliki je ne vidim, ste tukaj?
Ja, sem.
Aha, ok.
Jaz sebe vidim, ok.
Dobro. Se pravi, da začnemo pri vas v letošnjem letu, ste objavili, da ste že poskusili meriti določene izide v okviru nekih pilotnih projektov. Lahko mogoče za začetek poveste malo več o tem in kaj boste s temi rezultati pravzaprav pridobili?
Ja, lepo pozdravljeni vsi. No, mogoče čista najava oziroma to vprašanje zdaj ni čist odraz tega dejanskega, te trenutne situacije. Lahko pa rečem, glede na vse to, kar smo danes poslušali in zlasti te tuje predstavitve so mi bile zelo všeč, res in všeč tudi z tega vidika, ker lahko rečem, da Zavod za zdravstveno zavarovanje dejansko ne samo sledi, ampak gre v korak s časom na področju, se pravi, teh value-based, na področju plačevanja po izidu. Mi smo že v strateškem razvojnem programu za leto 2020-2025, ki ga imamo za naslednje srednjeročno obdobje, napovedali med drugim poleg teh, bom rekla, rednih posodobitev modelov plačevanja na vseh področjih, primar, sekundar, terciar, recimo, če rečemo, zlasti pa smo napovedali tudi uvedbo nekega pilotnega modela plačevanja, ki bi ga postavili tako, da bi upoštevali izide zdravljenja. Kar se mi zdi zelo pomembno z vsega tega, kar smo zdajle govorili. Res pa je, da za tak model potrebujemo neke kazalnike, potrebujemo te ocene teh učinkov, premse, promse in vse ostalo, ne samo z vidika pacienta, ampak takega celovitega vidika, kar pa ta trenutek v Sloveniji še ni nekaj, kar bi bilo zares uveljavljeno. Če želimo to vgraditi v nek model plačevanja in ne samo, tako nam je očitano včasih, plačujete samo storitve, dokler ne bomo imeli zelo trdnih kazalnikov, kakršnih koli že, po katerih bomo lahko učinke zdravljenja plačevali, do takrat jih ne moremo plačila vezati na te učinke. Še sicer, če to zelo dobro razgradimo po teh PDCA krogu in postopno gradimo, izboljšujemo te kazalnike, bomo zanesljivo najprej plačilo vezali samo na samo stimulacijo vezali na te kazalnike, ne celotnega plačila, ker to so zelo zahtevni krogi, zelo dolgotrajni postopki, da se to zares uvede. Tako kot smo zdaj že ugotavljali, ne, imamo posamezne sklope, kjer je to ali pilotno ali delno, nimamo pa nekih enotnih meril, da bi recimo, če rečem samo eno specialistično dejavnost, da bi jo pokrili recimo čez in čez, pa če govorimo mogoče zdaj o pulmologiji, ne, nimamo še zadosti, da bi to lahko izključno vezali na model plačevanja. Imamo pa v načrtu zdajle, konkretno sta se pokazali zdajle 2 priložnosti in zdajle smo že začeli 2 projekta. Eden je prenos evropski, neke joint action varianta, prenos neke dobre prakse, te integrirane oskrbe iz nekega nemškega modela. Predvidoma iz nemškega, konzorcij je večji, bomo še določali točno, so tam 4 dobre prakse, ki jih lahko prenašamo in se dejansko so pomembni tudi izidi zdravljenja in bomo noter vključevali, kaj bomo že lahko. Druga stvar je pa, kako bi, tudi je pa z pomočjo evropskih strukturnih skladov, tudi tak projekt državni, bom rekla, oziroma pač glavni akter je vseeno Zavod za zdravstveno zavarovanje, kako bi iz sedanjih modelov, se pravi fee for service, ki plačujemo storitve, tako kot smo rekli, prešli na pay for performance, tukaj sem zmeraj zakegla, se pravi, kako bi katera bi bila najboljša pot, da dejansko plačujemo po učinkih zdravljenja, to pa govorimo na nivo specialistične ambulantne dejavnosti. Se pravi, preučiti dobre prakse v tujini in kako bi z tega našega sistema prenove modelov plačevanja, ki jo stalno delamo, prišli en razvojni korak višji. Kar je zelo pomembno, da se postopno s temi stvarmi seznanjamo in poskušamo to pravo smer, ki jo pričakujejo tako izvajalci, zlasti pa pacienti oziroma z naše strani zavarovane osebe, da jim čim bolj, da denar čim bolj sledi bolniku oziroma zavarovancu.
Omenili ste integrirano obravnavo, se pravi, ta pay per performance lahko razumemo, da se ustrezno aplicira tudi pri ponudnikih zdravstvenih tehnologij, farmacevtskih družbah in tako naprej?
Ja, integrirano pomeni, da recimo, če govorimo o sladkornem bolniku, da vemo, kako se delijo pristojnosti med primarom, sekundarom, pa mogoče še širš, kako bi mogoče lahko plačali za takega bolnika v paketu, da zavarovalnica plača, ne bomo rekli zdravega, ampak oskrbljenega pacienta oziroma zavarovanca in kako se v tem sistemu potem izvajalci med seboj dogovorijo, prilagodijo, kako se tudi delijo tako tveganja kot prihranki na to temo, ker je pacient čim bolje oskrbljen, ker ga bolj holistično pogledamo in integriramo celo oskrbo okrog njega. To je ta ideja, o kateri zdaj, ampak to projektu smo 1 mesec, predvidoma bo trajal 3 leta, tako da močno upam oziroma sem prepričana, da se bomo tudi da bomo dobili en vzorec na podlagi, ki bi ga lahko prenesli pilotno zanesljivo v Slovenijo, kako bo pa potem naprej, bomo pa videli, če smo za tak pristop že zreli, da bomo sledili temu 4. cilju oziroma vsaj 3. oziroma vsaj tem, da bi naredili čim boljš za zavarovanca za njegove izide zdravljenja.
Zdaj, z trenutne perspektive, kaj so po vašem mnenju največje ovire, da bomo prišli iz tega fee for service v to? So to podatki ali je to IT infrastruktura, povezovanje, ali so kriteriji mogoče?
Kakor jaz danes poznam sistem, so to kazalniki kakovosti. Se pravi, kaj je tisti meter, na podlagi katerega bomo lahko ocenili, da je performance tak, da lahko plačamo zanj. Ker to je, kazalnike kakovosti imamo določene nekje na hospitalu, jih je toliko in toliko, jih imamo po posameznih dejavnostih, nimamo pa nekje splošno uveljavljenih, tudi tako prej smo omenjali Prems-Proms, to je projekt, to ni nekaj, kar je v Sloveniji splošno uveljavljeno. Da mi plačamo potem nekaj, mora biti to zelo dobro uveljavljen, mora biti konsolidiran, moramo se vsi strinjati, da je to, ker sicer bomo naredili še slabše oziroma bomo naredili prevelike razlike. In ker je to pa tudi nekaj, kar potrebuje zelo dolg razvojni cikel, da se sploh uveljavi, je to za moje pojme največja ovira. Če hočeš plačati po izidih, po učinkih zdravljenja, moraš znati oceniti, kaj ta izid je. Vemo, da vsak, tako kot ste rekli prej, gospa Južnič, vsak izid tudi ni pozitiven, včasih pač vsi umremo enkrat. In vse to je treba zelo modro ovrednotiti in določiti, da bomo lahko to ugradili v elemente plačevanja. Kaj na koncu prevesti te izide v evre, to je zelo zahtevna stvar in ne smemo narediti ničesa, kar bomo kaj podarili ali pa naredili še slabše, kot je danes.
Imam še eno vprašanje za gospod Bolka, ampak preden nadaljujem, mogoče tukaj kakšen komentar strani Maje ali pa dr. Šorlija na doslej povedano, kako vi to ocenjujete?
Lahko jaz, prosim?
Ja, Maja.
Hvala, Sašo. Jaz se zelo strinjam z gospod Bolko in z vsemi stvarmi, kar je rekla. Seveda je tukaj treba imeti zelo, zelo jasne kriterije. Sama sem svoje navdušenje izražala predvsem zaradi tega, ker se je do zdaj pacientov vidik, vsaj po mojem mnenju, precej zanemarjal. Jasno mi je tudi to, da vidik pacienta in njegova ocena, da je to subjektivna. Kar se tiče stroka ima precej bolj oprijemljive kriterije, bolj objektivne kriterije glede izidov zdravljenja. Tam je jasno postavljeno, so smernice, se točno lahko sledi, kaj se je komu dalo, koliko časa, kako dolgo so bila za zdravljenja, koliko ljudi se je pozdravilo, kdaj se je bolezen vrnila, če se je, kako dolgo se je potem metastatska bolezen obravnavala. Skratka, tukaj je zelo, zelo jasno. Tudi stroka ima zdaj, vsaj v Sloveniji, že prve klinične registre, kjer se bodo ti kazalniki zelo dobro in natančno in predvsem objektivno merili. Ko mi govorimo o Prems in Proms, tukaj govorimo predvsem bolj ali manj o subjektivnem vrednotenju. In jaz seveda se strinjam z gospod Bolko, da je tu treba biti pa bistveno bolj previden, ker dejstvo je, da ljudje smo si zelo različni, zelo različno tudi tako, kot je gospod Šorli rekel, se odzivamo na tako stresne situacije, kot je bolezen ob koncu, ko so izčrpane možnosti zdravljenja, mi bi pa še vseeno poskusili še nekaj, čeprav stroka ve, da ne bo nič dobrobiti za to. In ko bo nekdo, ki bo imel tako, v narekovajih, ali tudi ne slabo izkušnjo z zdravstvenim sistemom, bo mogoče tudi njegov Prems in Proms bistveno bolj negativno ocenjen, kot bi bil, recimo, če bi bila tista preiskava še izpeljana. Tako da, ja, sigurno, z veliko kilogrami razuma in soli tukaj, pomembno pa se mi zdi, kot predstavnici, zagovorništva pacientov, da se pacientov vidik sploh začenja upoštevati tudi v nekih formalnih okvirih vrednotenja in, če hočemo, tudi bodočega plačevanja v zdravstvu. Hvala.
Bi pa še jaz nekaj dodal. S tem, ko postavljamo pacienta v središče pozornosti, mu predajamo to del odgovornosti. Mislim, da je bilo prej lepo povedan za sladkorno bolezen, kdo vse, ampak tudi pacient le nosi svojo odgovornost, njegov način prehranjevanja, telesne aktivnosti in vse ostale stvari. In tudi pacient tukaj mora v tem procesu zdravljenja prevzemati svoj del odgovornosti za izide. Ne more vse izide prepustiti nekomu drugemu. Mi imamo veliko težav z izrazito prekomerno prehranjenimi ljudmi, ki kljub svojim zapletom bolezni še vedno kadijo in stvari naprej, pričakujejo pa od sistema, da jim bojo urejali kvaliteto življenja. Tudi bolnik sam mora začeti prevzemati odgovornost za svoje zdravje in zdravljenje. In tle mislim, da v tem sistemu, tako kot lepo tudi strani zavarovanca povedan, njega tudi vključiti in tudi njemu vse te stvari nekako s deljeno odgovornostjo predati.
Zdajle pa mogoče vprašanje za gospod Dragan. Zasebne zdravstvene zavarovalnice ste malce v drugačni vlogi, saj sami definirate razmerja med zavarovanci in zdravstvenimi ustanovami. Gre za sistem, ki je vsaj v tem trenutku manj kompleksen in zato je mogoče to priložnost za lažje vpeljavo koncepta value-based healthcare. Tako da vprašanje, kako pa pri vas spremljate, kaj se dogaja z vašimi zavarovanci skozi proces zdravljenja, če so zadovoljivo rešili svoje zdravstvene težave in kako to potem tudi vpliva na vaše sodelovanje z zdravstvenimi ustanovami.
Ja, pozdravljeni vsi skupaj. Naši zavarovanci seveda imajo možnost in pravico do sodelovanja pri vrednotenju različnih vidikov kakovosti njihove zdravstvene obravnave. Vendar pa je to je za zagotavljanje kakovosti in varnosti zdravstvene obravnave pomembno, da se zavarovanci tudi kritično odzovejo in ovrednotijo, kako in s čim so bili oziroma niso bili zadovoljni, oziroma tudi kakšne so bile njihove izkušnje v povezavi z zdravstveno obravnavo in posledično izidi zdravljenja. Podatki o zdravljenju in zdravstvenem stanju so občutljivi osebni podatki, zato lahko spremljamo njihovo obravnavo oziroma izid zdravljenja samo, kadar nas zavarovanec sam obvesti o morebitni želji za nadaljevanje oziroma zdravljenja oziroma nas prostovoljno obvesti o zadovoljstvu, pomanjkljivosti storitve pri posameznem zdravstvenemu izvajalcu. Po opravljeni storitvi je vsak zavarovanec pozvan in z njim vzpostavimo stik in mu tudi pomagamo pri urejanju morebitnih potrebnih novih storitev oziroma mu svetujemo pač z informacijami, ki so nam znane. Torej so povabljeni k podaji mnenj in komentarjev in na podlagi teh zavarovalnica ustrezno reagira in usklajuje potem bodoče sodelovanje z zdravstvenimi ustanovami.
Se pravi, ta pay for performance se tukaj v bistvu kaže bolj v obliki, da tam, kjer je večje zadovoljstvo in tako naprej, je tudi večji obseg sodelovanja.
Ja, tako je in tudi strinjam se z gospo Anko, da je vrednotenje izidov res zahtevna stvar in tukaj gre za subjektivne ocene v precejšnji meri in žal izid vedno ni pozitiven, zato potem tudi povratne informacije temu tako sledijo.
Hvala lepa. Zdaj pa mogoče še, da se vrnem na eno vprašanje za gospod Bolka. V uvajanju novih terapij se zagotovo soočate z vprašanjem, kakšen bo dejanski učinek tako z vidika izidov kot stroškov. Zdaj, ali gre to za inovacije, ki se razvijajo znotraj zdravstvene ustanove, se pravi za neke nove postopke, ali zdravila, ali ponudnike novih zdravstvenih tehnologij. Ali bi bili bolj odprti za vključevanje novih inovacij, če bi del tveganja prevzeli predlagatelji inovacije, v smislu, da bi v primeru nedoseganja pričakovanih ali pa recimo temu obljubljenih izidov vrnili del sredstev nekako nazaj v zdravstveni sistem?
Sem se odklopila. Zelo zanimivo vprašanje. Ja, na načelni ravni lahko rečemo seveda ja, ampak jaz, ko sem vedno majčkeno bolj gospodinjska oziroma tak praktičen pristop, se bom pa takoj vprašala, kako bi to izvedla. V Sloveniji je že sicer problem uvajanja novih tehnologij v obvezno zdravstveno zavarovanje, se pravi v deplačilo z tega zavarovanja. Kako se to sploh uvede? Funkcija zdravstvenega sveta, ki je praviloma ta inštitut, ki ocenjuje novo tehnologijo in tako naprej, in tam se že oceni tako strokovno-medicinska vrednost, učinkovitost novosti kot stroškovna, in se potem predlaga za uvajanje v program, ne. In tam že nekako nikoli se v čem takem ne odloča, ne razglablja, da bi se nekdo delila ta tveganja, ne. Bi bilo pa to zagotovo zanimivo, ne, da rečemo, da bi na tak način kakšno novost uvedli, ampak spet vprašanje, v kolikem času, ne. Kakor sem jaz seznanjena, sem zadnje 2-3 leta članica zdravstvenega sveta, tudi z tega vidika zdravstvene ekonomike. Vse te nove tehnologije predstavljajo novost, ki se bo izplačala na daljši čas. In to se govori v letih, a ne. Se pravi, zato, ker ne bo, če uvedemo telemedicino za sladkorne bolnike, ki jih spremljamo na daljavo, bo zaradi boljše oskrbljenosti, bo manj amputacij in tako naprej, ampak to govorimo v 5-10 letih. In a bomo res lahko za tako dolgo obdobje si delili ta tveganja, a ne, nekako v tem, če govorimo, da to damo v neko javno zdravstvo, kako bomo potem zavezali nekoga kot dobavitelja česa, a ne, tlele si ne predstavljam čisto dobre sheme. Ideja je zanimiva na načelni ravni, kako jo pa v prakso izvesti, ali pa če se temu zdajle izognem, potem rečem ja, a ne, če pa rečem, kako bi to v praksi, mi pa zdajle ta shema ni čisto jasna, kako bi si ne predstavljam, kako bi jo to zares lahko uvajali, a ne. Razen, če bi recimo šli s piloti, da bi šli z tehnologijami, ki se obrnejo na krajši čas, potem bi bilo to lahko zelo zanimivo in izvedljivo.
Doktor Šorli, se pravi, vezano na to razmišljanje o deljenju nekih tveganj, risk sharing, bi bile zdravstvene ustanove pripravljene prevzeti določeno tveganje pri uvajanju novosti, ki naj bi izboljšale izide zdravljenja. Zdaj, prej je gospa Bolka že v enem od prejšnjih odgovorov omenila, da je razmišljala v smeri ocenjevanja izidov skozi daljše časovno obdobje, skozi celotno postopek zdravljenja. Kakšen je vaš pogled na to?
S tem se jaz povsem strinjam, pa mislim, da so danes te stvari že povsem izvedljive. Pa če povem konkretno za nas, pri razvijanju novih tehnologij, zlasti digitalizacije bolnice, smo se z ponudnikom storitev dogovorili, da nosimo vsak del odgovornosti. Definirali smo, kaj je trenutni strošek, kaj pričakujemo, da se bo s to tehnologijo v strošku zmanjšal, in del tega prihranka namenili plačilu. Vkolikor tega prihranka ne bo, bo tudi izostal del plačila tistemu, ki nam je sistem pomagal zgraditi. Torej mislim, da se te stvari danes da delati, treba najti načine, ki in kako se naredi. Seveda je stvar zelo kompleksna, definirati, kaj so izhodi pri posameznih stvarih, tako večkrat rečen, je zelo težko. Treba pa najti tiste stvari, pri katerih se take stvari relativno dobro dajo definirati, na začetku s precej enostavnimi stvarmi, pa skozi kompleksnejšimi, in temi iti in na tak način deliti tudi dele odgovornosti. Se pravi, že spet iz svojega domačega področja. Rehabilitacija ključnih bolnikov, že dolgo let ne plačana storitev sa strani zavarovalnice, kljub temu, da je povsem jasno z študij iz okrog, da se ta povrne v letih zdravljenja teh bolnikov. In to so stvari, pri katerih bi morali stopiti skupaj, reči v redu, če bo to tako, ne samo vsak del odgovornosti, vi tle nekaj več kadra date, mi tam na uni strani nekaj dodatno plačamo. Proces, v kateri se pri zavarovalnici že več kot 10 let, vsakoletno v splošnem dogovoru trudimo doseči plačilo tazga programa, pa ne gre. Zaradi tega, ker je kompleksnost, kako te stvari na koncu obračunati, prezahtevna. Torej, mislim, da so te stvari, da smo pripravljeni tudi izvajalci zdravstvenih storitev pa teh stvarih iti v določeno tveganje ali pa prevzeti določeno tveganje, tudi svoje strani seveda z zelo natančno definiranimi stvarmi. Če smo pa pri tem, da je storitev v vsakem primeru podplačana, pa se nam tveganje ne splača. Zaradi tega pa nam je pa itak bolj učinkovito tega ne početi, kot sploh početi oziroma zraven še tveganje prevzemati.
Se pravi, potencial definitivno, če želimo spodbujati inovacije, tukaj je. Spremlja nas pa tudi predsednica Zdravniške zbornice, ki je imela, mislim, da neko komentar ali vprašanje, tako da, dr. Šebašek, izvolite.
Vklopiti mikrofon.
Mikrofon, če lahko vklopite, vas ne slišimo, se opravičujem.
Evo.
Aha, evo.
Lepo bo. Ja, hvala za povabilo v to razpravo. Zelo zanimivo je in tukaj me je spodbudil ta komentar, da je treba nekako upariti oziroma povezati plačevanje po učinku pa zdravstvo, ki te storitve zbira za to, da bi bilo plačano po učinku. Seveda je ta zgodba, ima zelo dolgo brado in vsi poskusi, da bi se začela meriti kakovost na različnih področjih medicine, so na žalost klavrno končali. Ne vem zakaj, ampak dala sem si razložiti od nekaterih kolegov, ki so te podatke zbirali in so enkrat bili ustavljeni zaradi pomanjkanja sredstev, enkrat zato, ker niso bili kriteriji prav zbrani, enkrat zato, ker glavno vedno je bilo zato, ker ni bilo nikomur v interesu. In to sem hotela povedati. Ni bilo v interesu ne izvajalcem, ker bi se pokazale razlike med njimi, ne regulatorjem, ker bi morali pač sprejeti pravila, ki bi boljše izvajalce primerneje nagrajevali. In iskreno povedano tudi nekaterim izvajalcem, ne prav posameznikom, ker so razlike, ki so jih že izvedena merjenja pokazala, bile precej velike. In potem smo se izgubili na razčiščevanju tega, zakaj je do teh razlik prišlo. Skratka, tukaj čaka poleg dela na informatiki v ozadju še ogromno dela na samem iskanju pravih kazalcev, na podlagi katerih bomo merili. Mislim, da je nekaj o tem tudi gospa Bolka govorila, ker seveda to ni samo slovenski problem, ampak tudi rečemo evropski pa svetovni, ampak v Sloveniji tu capljamo tako daleč zadaj, da ko se primerjamo, ne vem, ravno s kolegi iz Nemčije, me vedno znova malo pogreje. Lahko bi naredili več.
Hvala za ta komentar. Dejstvo tukaj mogoče v tem trenutku pogrešamo predstavnika zdravstvene politike, ki dejansko tudi postavlja res te smernice, kaj pravzaprav želimo v zdravstvu začeti, tako da to bo mogoče priložnost za postaviti vprašanje.
Mogoče samo, če lahko dodam. Ja,
izvolite.
Tukaj doktor Kalan Živčec daje v chat noter informacijo. Jaz nisem poimenoma govorila, ampak dejansko je Zdravniška zbornica intenzivno delala na tem problemu. Vendar smo, bom rekla, obupali, ker to ni bilo realizirano. Tako da hvala doktor Kalanovi in dajmo združiti moči, da gremo tudi s vsebinskim delom naprej.
Hvala lepa. Počasi se bližamo zaključku te okrogle mize. Vseeno pa še eno konkretno vprašanje za gospod Dragan. Ste spremljali predstavitev dr. Cera, ki jo je imel na temo uporabe matičnih celic. Zdaj vem, da je to šele v nekem takem začetnem, se pravi, stadiju, ampak glede na to, da recimo z vašimi zavarovanji zelo veliko krijete storitev, predvsem na področju ortopedije in tako naprej, kako gledate, je to neka taka inovacija, ki bi jo pa mogoče zasebne zdravstvene zavarovalnice vključile v nekaj, kar krije in da se s tem tudi naredi neka večja prepoznavnost ali pa ocena uspešnosti takih posegov? Vas ne slišimo, samo trenutek.
Se upravičujem, me slišite?
Ja, izvolite.
Ja, sigurno je to inovacija, ki ima veliko vrednost in tudi ima mesto za razmislek tudi pri nas. Mi spremljamo tudi pričakovanja strank in skozi takšne rešitve poskušamo jim zagotoviti neke boljše storitve oziroma boljšo izkušnjo, tako da vse skozi spremljamo to in tudi iščemo napredne rešitve, boljše rešitve, da omogočimo strankam kvalitetnejšo zdravstveno oskrbo.
Super, hvala. Se pravi, en takeaway mogoče za dr. Cera, ko bo iskal potencialne plačnike za te svoje inovacije, da se poveže tudi z zasebnimi zavarovalnicami. Zdaj za zaključek bi pa mogoče prosil še enkrat gospo Južnič, Maja, če lahko glede na vse povedano, smo na pravi poti, da bo bolnik dejansko v središču zdravstvenega sistema.
Ja, saj bolnik pravzaprav je ves čas bil, zdaj se je o tem govorilo in tudi, bom rekla, izpostavljalo to, do zdaj se, kot sem že v začetku rekla, mislim, da ni. Ampak glavno je, da zdaj se, in ja, jaz mislim, da vse te, bom rekla, razmišljanja vodijo, bom rekla, zagotovo na neko višjo raven, ki bo pač rezultirala v dobro bolnika. Rada bi poudarila to, da konec koncev zavedati se moramo, ne glede na to, na kateri strani delujemo, ali delujemo na strani zavarovalnice ali klinike, industrije, odločevalcev ali skupnosti bolnikov, moramo vedeti, da smo vsi lahko v katerikoli fazi svojega življenja tudi bolniki. Se pravi, da ne delamo za nekoga tretjega, nekega abstraktnega, delamo za vse skupaj, za nas. Mislim pa, da so taka srečanja in take debate izjemno pomembne, zlasti za slovenski prostor, tudi zato, ker se moramo zavedati še nečesa. Namreč mi imamo, pa ne še tako kritiziramo ta svoj zdravstveni sistem, zaenkrat še vedno urejeno tako, da imajo bolniki, ne glede na to, za čim zbolijo, možnost dobiti vse, kar je danes v tem svetu znanega in registriranega. In če želimo, da bomo po tej poti šli tudi naprej, mislim, da je prav, da se pogovarjamo o tem, o čemer smo se danes, da iščemo neke optimizacije in izboljšanje rešitev, ker sicer ne vem, koliko časa bo ta sistem še vzdržen na tak način, kot je bil zdaj. Zato pa, če smo že prej govorili in že ves čas govorimo o tako imenovanem shared risks, seveda velja, da moramo ta del nekega tveganja in da pripomoremo k temu izboljšanju tudi bolniki sami. Se pravi, da se zavedamo, da je teža in odgovornost, tako kot je bilo že prej rečeno, tudi na naši strani. In da to predvsem pomeni, da ko smo že v procesu zdravljenja, da sledimo navodilom zdravnika, da redno hodimo na svoje preglede, da sledimo vsemu, kar nam povejo, da je pač za nas dobro. Pa ne samo to, ko smo v nekem zdravljenju, tudi preden smo. Tukaj imamo v mislih predvsem udeleževanje v preventivne, presejalne programe, da naredimo nekaj že na stopnji, ko nismo bolni, da lahko to tudi preprečimo. In tukaj imamo pa zelo veliko odgovornost in vlogo tudi vsa društva bolnikov, predvsem pri nekem informiranju, ozaveščanju, o dvigovanju neke, bom rekla, te zavesti med zdravo javnostjo in pa seveda med tudi že obolelo in njihovimi svojci.
Hvala. Mogoče še kakšna zaključna misel ostalih sogovornikov, dr. Šorli?
Ne, mislim, da se vedno več ljudi, ki delujejo v zdravstvu in izven njega, zaveda pomen kvalitete življenja, da ni samo predpisovanje zdravil tisto, kar rešuje, ampak da je cela kompleksnost procesa, ki vodi samo zdravljenje, tista, ki je pomembna. Jaz bom rekel, te stvari vidim kot eno osnovo za močno informacijsko podprto bazo podatkov, pri kateri lahko se o teh stvarih zdravnik in ostali zdravstveni delavci odločajo, zaradi tega, ker več, ko bomo imeli podatkov, lažje se bomo odločali, bolj bolniku precizno medicino bomo lahko uporabljali.
Še gospa Bolka.
Ja, za zaključek jaz mislim, da bi se morali osredotočiti na to, kako bomo jutri to vse obvladovali. In jaz mislim, da brez neke neodvisne inštitucije, agencije, česarkoli, ki bi se ukvarjala s kazalniki, z vsemi temi kakovosti, z vodenjem, z usklajevanjem vsega tega na državnem nivoju, bo težko. Izvajalci sami so ločeni oziroma nimajo nekje skupaj, da bi jih nekdo skupaj celovito povezal pa to uvajal. Zavarovalnici se oporekajo pristojnosti za to, mi samo z vidika plačnika nekako potem ni, kljub temu, da imamo zelo veliko podatkov in za te procesne kazalnike lahko marsikaj tudi naredimo, pa postopno sklujemo. Drugi pa, kot je več očitno ta naša zgodovina kaže, nam ne uspe tako parcialno tega sestaviti v celo sliko in nam bo brez nekega centralnega vodenja, jaz ne rečem, kdorkoli bi to bil, ampak brez tega bomo zelo težko presegli to sedanje stanje, v vsakem primeru, ker nihče sam zadosti tudi bi moral biti strašno proaktiven, pa tudi pristojnosti, hitro si preko te meje, ko si še pristojen, vsaj če govorim zavarovalniškega vidika, nam bo stroka rekla, ja, vi ste zavarovalnice, gledate samo iz vidika, z finančnega vidika, kar ni čisto res, je pa to naše prioritetno poslanstvo in tudi moramo tako. Tako da jaz mislim, da v to smer bi morali tako sistemsko centralno razmišljati, da bi najprej to tako temeljne čvrsto postavili, potem bo lažje naprej. Dokler pa tega ne bomo pa povsod prišli do nekega zidu steklenega ali pa betonskega, kar ne bomo znali čez.
Hvala. Še vseeno priložnost tudi, gospod Dragan, vi sicer imate svoj mikrosistem, kakšna zaključna misel? Mute, vas ne slišimo.
Ja, hvala. Ja, meni se je pa porodila misel, da pač, ko povezujemo izid zdravljenja na podlagi vrednotenja izidov, je tukaj morda priložnost za povečanje preventivnih storitev na vseh področjih in pri vseh deležnikih. Osveščanja o preventivnih storitvah in izboljšanja pač preventivnega zdravja že vnaprej.
A se lahko kar nekaj vtaknem, ker se absolutno strinjam, ampak če po drugi strani ne zavežemo pacienta, zavarovanca, da je to, če nekaj dobi, da tudi potem to zares upošteva, ker mi imamo recimo izvajalci, imajo težave konkretno z delavnicami za hujšanje, se jim lepše reče uradno, ampak tam je recimo 10 obiskov, prvič pridejo, naslednjič pa rečejo, da je to itak brez veze in ne pridejo. Kako naj izvajalec zagotovi to izvajanje, kako naj, mi pa plačamo, ali pa pač sekiramo izvajalce, pa ne plačamo zato, ker ne zagotovijo obiska. Ampak izvajalec ne more, če pacient ne pride, če se tega ne zaveda. In preskočiti to, doseči to odgovornost pacienta je po drugi strani še en tak zelo močen steber, ki bi ga tudi morali z nekimi bonusi, ne bom rekla malusi, ampak najprej z bonusi, ampak kako to doseči je pa tudi, mislim, da kar zelo tak zaresen izziv.
Se strinjam in to je sigurno bi bila iztočnica za naslednjo okroglo mizo, vendar pa žal se je naš čas že pred 5 minutami nekako iztekel, tako da vsem res najlepša hvala za sodelovanje in za vaše misli in sedaj predajam besedo Tjaši.
Tako, a se slišimo? Sam preverim, preden govorim. Ok, super, odlično. Torej, hvala vsem, ki ste z nami zdržali do konca. Še enkrat hvala vsem govorcem. Na tej točki naj se zahvalim tudi organizacijskemu odboru te konference, v katerem smo bili poleg mene še Gregor Cuzak, Urška Ravter in pa Mojca Cviren. Vsi trije tudi čez celo leto skrbijo, da HealthDay živi živahno življenje. Zdaj, preden čisto zaključimo, bi se še enkrat vseeno razdelili v breakout roome. Poudarjam, namen breakout roomov je, da se malo spoznate med sabo. Torej, to so majhne skupine, 4-5 ljudi, predstavite se, glede na to, da nimamo možnosti tega storiti ob kavi. Tako da, hvala še enkrat vsem za udeležbo in upam, da se naslednje leto vidimo v živo.